Adrian Vale slid the folder across the marble table without looking up. Inside, a single appointment card, a clinic address printed in clean black ink, and a check made out to cash for $50,000. "Handle it," he said, before the end of the week. Vivian Cross sat across from him, her husband of 4 years, the man she had believed in before she understood what believing in Adrian Vale actually cost, and she did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She looked at the check, at the clinic card, at the man who had just attempted to purchase the end of their child's existence, the same way he purchased everything else in his life. She picked up the folder, set it back down on his side of the table. "Your empire means nothing to me," she said. Then she walked out. And Adrian Vale, the most feared man in Chicago, sat alone in his $40 million penthouse and felt, for the first time in 23 years, something he could not buy his way out of. If this story already has you gripped, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss what happens next, because these stories don't wait for anyone. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. We want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The photographs were not hidden well. That was the first thing Vivian noticed, not the content of them, not the woman in them, not the hotel room she recognized from a business trip Adrian had supposedly taken alone to New York in February. The first thing she noticed was that they were sitting in the second drawer of his home office desk, underneath a single manila folder labeled Quarterly Projections, as if whoever left them there had done it carelessly or deliberately, or both. Vivian had gone into the office looking for a pen. She worked from home 3 days a week, managing the charitable foundation that bore the Vale family name. A foundation that, she had slowly come to understand over 4 years of marriage, existed primarily to make Adrian Vale appear to be a man with a conscience. She ran it anyway. She ran it because the grants were real, the scholarships were real, the after-school programs in the South Side were real, and she was not going to let the source of the money make those children less real. She had gone in looking for a pen. The drawer stuck, the way it always stuck, and she yanked it harder than she meant to, and the folder shifted, and the photographs slid out onto the surface of the desk like they had been waiting. She stood there for a long moment before she picked them up. She was not naive. She had married Adrian Vale knowing, in the way that people who choose to look away know things, that he operated in spaces the law did not fully illuminate. She had told herself he was a businessman who used aggressive methods. She had told herself the rumors were exaggerated, the whispers from people who were jealous of what he had built. She had told herself a lot of things over 4 years, and she had mostly managed to believe them, because she was not stupid. She was just in love, and those two things, she had learned, were not mutually exclusive. But she had never told herself he was faithful, not really, not beneath the surface of what she chose to believe. And standing now in the home office with the photographs in her hands, she understood that she had known this the way you know a tooth is going to hurt before the dentist touches it. You know it. You just don't acknowledge it until the pressure lands. The woman in the photographs was younger than Vivian by at least 10 years. She had dark hair and a way of tilting her head when she smiled that made her look unguarded, which was probably what Adrian had liked about her. Unguarded was something Adrian Vale sought in other people the same way he avoided it in himself. The hotel room was the Carlisle. Vivian recognized the wallpaper. She and Adrian had stayed there twice. She put the photographs back in the drawer. She straightened the manila folder over them. She went back to the kitchen, found a pen in the ceramic holder by the coffee maker, where they always kept pens, and sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the surface of it for approximately 40 minutes without writing a single word. She did not call her sister. She did not call her best friend Donna, who would have immediately started catastrophizing in that well-meaning way of hers that made everything feel like a disaster even before it was fully formed. She did not call her mother, who had never trusted Adrian and would have found a way to make even this moment about being right. She sat alone and she thought about what she was going to do. When Adrian came home that evening, Vivian had dinner on the table. Not because she was the kind of woman who made dinner when she was devastated, she was not, but because she had needed to do something with her hands for the past 3 hours, and cooking was the only thing she could think of that required enough concentration to keep her from shaking. He kissed her on the cheek, the way he always did when he came home, The automatic gesture of a man who had long ago stopped being present for the small rituals of his life. "You look tired," he said, pouring himself a drink. "Long day," she said. They ate. He talked about a meeting with the city planning commissioner, something about a waterfront development that was moving slower than he wanted. She watched him eat. She watched him talk. She watched him be entirely himself confident, controlled, slightly bored in the way of men who have gotten everything they wanted and find it insufficient. And she thought, I could tell him right now. I could put the photographs on this table and watch his face. She did not. Not because she was afraid of him. She wasn't, not exactly. But because she understood that confronting Adrian Vale without knowing what she wanted the outcome to be was like showing up to a gunfight with your hands empty. Adrian did not respond to ambushes. He dismantled them. He had spent 23 years building a criminal organization that survived because he never reacted before he had already decided how the reaction would end. She needed to know what she wanted before she started a war she couldn't win on his terms. She spent 2 weeks thinking about it. She gave herself 2 weeks, which felt like both too long and not long enough. And during those 2 weeks, she went to work, and she ran the foundation, and she came home, and she made dinner twice, and ordered takeout 3 times, and slept beside him in their bed, and thought about the woman in the photographs, and thought about 4 years of marriage, and thought about what her life looked like from the outside, which was very different from what it looked like from where she was standing. On the 15th day, she woke up at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark, and realized something that rearranged the inside of her chest completely. She was 6 weeks late. She had not counted because she had been too consumed by the photographs, too consumed by the 2 weeks of science and assessment, and she lay in the dark beside Adrian's sleeping form and counted backward twice and reached the same number both times. She got up quietly and went to the bathroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of the tub and breathed. She bought the test the next morning from a pharmacy 3 miles from their building, paying cash, which she understood immediately was the kind of decision you make when some part of you already knows what the result is going to be. The result was what she already knew it would be. She sat in the bathroom of the pharmacy's single-stall restroom and held the test in her hand and felt something move through her that she could not name cleanly. It was not entirely happiness, and it was not entirely terror, and it was not entirely grief, but it had elements of all three. And underneath all of it there was something else, something quieter and more certain, that said, this changes everything. She had not planned a pregnancy. She and Adrian had talked about children the way people talk about renovating a second property, theoretically, eventually, when the timing is better. The timing was never better. The timing had been not better for 4 years, and she had stopped pushing and he had never started. And now she was sitting in a pharmacy bathroom, holding a positive test, and thinking about a woman in a Carlisle hotel room, and a man who had kissed her cheek last night and asked if there was more bread. She did not tell him immediately. She needed another week. She needed to be sure not of the test. The test was clear, but of herself, of what she was going to do, of how she was going to say the words, of whether the words would even matter. She told him on a Tuesday evening. She had cooked again, the hands thing again, and she waited until he was settled with his second drink, the point in the evening when Adrian Vale was as close to relaxed as he ever got, when the edges of his control softened slightly, when almost resembled the man she had married, before she understood what she had actually married. "I'm pregnant," she said. He looked at her, not a long look. A quick assessment, the kind he gave boardroom presentations when he was calculating the angle of a problem. Then he set down his drink. How far along? 7 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him process it the way she had watched him. Process business setbacks, with the outward stillness of a man who had trained himself to never let his first reaction be visible. "This isn't a good time," he said. "I didn't plan it." "I know you didn't." He said it without accusation. That was almost worse, the flat acknowledgement, the complete absence of anything that resembled feeling. "But you understand that my current situation makes this complicated." "Your current situation," she repeated. "There are people who would use a child as leverage, Vivian. You know this. You know what I do." She did know. She had chosen for 4 years to know it in the vague and peripheral way that let her keep going. But she also knew, sitting across from him, that the word complicated in Adrian Vale's vocabulary meant something specific. It meant he had already decided. "I'll have my assistant make some calls," he said. "There are good clinics. discreet. We can handle this quietly. Handle it, she said. It's the right decision, given everything. She looked at him. The man she had married, the man who had on the morning she found the photographs, been entirely capable of kissing her cheek and asking about bread and sitting across from her for 40 minutes without a single indication that he had been in the Carlisle Hotel with another woman 6 weeks ago. Are you telling me or are you asking me? She said. I'm being practical, so that's telling. His jaw tightened slightly. Vivian. No, she said, just the one word, clean and flat. The next morning he slid the folder across the table. The clinic card, the check, the $50,000. She picked it up. She read the address. She looked at the amount. She looked at him, and she thought about everything she had not said over 4 years, everything she had chosen to look away from, everything she had told herself was manageable, everything she had traded in the name of what she'd called love, and she understood that this was the moment. This was the exact moment where she would either spend the rest of her life bending toward Adrian Vale, or she would not. She set the folder back on his side of the table. Your empire means nothing to me, she said. She walked out of the kitchen. She walked to their bedroom. She pulled a single suitcase from the closet, and she packed for 3 days. She did not pack for longer, because packing for longer would have made it real, in a way she was not ready to hold yet, and she picked up her phone, and she called the one person she had not called in the 2 weeks of silence, the one person who would not catastrophize, who would not say I told you so, who would simply say, come. Her grandmother Mara Cross answered on the second ring. Vivian, Mara said, just her name. The way Mara always said it like it was enough, like Vivian's name alone contained everything that needed to be acknowledged. I need to come to you, Vivian said, a pause. Not a long one. The drive from Chicago to Tucson is 19 hours if you push it, Mara said. Stop in Amarillo. There's a decent motel on the 40 Fancy, but the beds are clean. I'll have your room ready by the time you get here. Vivian put the suitcase in her car and drove out of the underground parking garage at 7:40 in the morning. She did not leave a note. She did not call Adrian's number when it lit up on her phone console 3 times before she reached the city limits. She drove south on the I-55 and then west, and the city fell away behind her in layers. The skyline first, then the suburbs, then the flat grid of the outer ring, and then just road and sky, and the specific particular feeling of a woman who has made a decision and is still inside the first hour of what that decision will cost her. She drove. She stopped in Bloomington for gas and didn't go inside. She stopped outside of Springfield for a bottle of water and stood beside her car in the parking lot of a truck stop and looked at the flat winter sky and thought, I am having this baby. The thought did not feel brave when she said it to herself. It just felt true. It felt like the only thing that was clearly true in a situation where almost everything else had turned out to be something other than what she believed. Her phone rang 9 times between Chicago and the Missouri border. She counted. 6 times from Adrian's number, twice from a number she didn't recognize that she suspected was his attorney, once from Donna, who had no idea what was happening and probably just wanted to make plans for lunch. She did not answer any of them. She stopped in Amarillo the way Mara told her to. The motel was exactly what her grandmother had described. Nothing fancy, clean beds, a vending machine in the hallway that dispensed orange juice in small plastic bottles. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt the particular silence of a place where nobody knew her name and thought about the woman she had been yesterday morning and the woman she was becoming, and the distance between those two people, which was not yet something she could measure clearly. She slept better than she expected. She arrived in Tucson on a Thursday afternoon, pulling up the long gravel driveway to Mara Cross's house, just before 4 o'clock, the December sun sitting low and orange over the desert ridgeline. The house was the same as it had always been sing-story. Terracotta tile, the big saguaro in the front yard that Mara had been watching grow since 1987. Vivian sat in the car for a moment. After she turned off the engine, looking at the house, feeling something unclench in her chest that she hadn't realized had been clenched. Mara came out before Vivian even opened the door. 71 years old, 5'4", the same gray braid she'd worn for the past 20 years. Moving with that particular unhurried speed that was her grandmother's signature, she didn't rush, but she arrived exactly when she needed to. She opened Vivian's car door. She looked at her granddaughter. She took in the suitcase and the red eyes, and the way Vivian's shoulders were set like a woman who had been holding herself together for a long drive. "Come inside," Mara said. "I made soup." Vivian got out of the car. She stood in the driveway in the cold desert afternoon and looked at her grandmother and said, "I'm pregnant, Mara." Mara put a hand on Vivian's face, just the hand dry and warm. "I know," she said. Vivian hadn't told her. "Come inside." The first week in Tucson was not easy. Vivian slept 12 hours the first night and woke up, feeling not rested but less actively undone, which was a start. She ate Marsha's soup. She sat on the back porch and watched the desert go from morning color to afternoon heat to the long, cool blue of evening and did not try to make herself feel anything specific. She let herself be in the house. She let herself be with Mara, who had a gift that few people possessed, the gift of not asking questions until the person you were with had enough space to start offering answers. It took 4 days before Vivian told her everything. Not in one sitting, it came out in pieces, the way things do when you've been managing them silently for too long and the silence finally gives. She told Mara about the photographs first, then about Adrian's response to the pregnancy, then about the folder on the table and the check and the clinic card and the $50,000, and about the way he had said handle it with the same inflection he used when he told his assistant to handle a catering problem. Mara listened to all of it without interrupting. When Vivian was done, she was quiet for a moment, looking out at the yard. "What do you want to do?" Mara said. "Have the baby," Vivian said. "Keep her away from him." "You know it's a her?" "No," Vivian almost smiled. "But I think so. He'll look for you," Mara said. Not a warning. Just a fact. Offered the way Mara offered most things plainly, without drama, because the truth didn't benefit from ornamentation. "I know he has resources, I know. And you're not afraid of that?" Vivian thought about it honestly, which was what Mara always required. Not the answer that sounded right, but the true one. "I'm afraid of it," she said. "But I'm more afraid of raising a child in his orbit. I'm more afraid of what it would mean to go back." Nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "then we figure it out." That was how Mara Cross approached problems. Not with grand strategies or speeches about strength, but with that single phrase, "we figure it out." It had gotten Vivian through her parents' divorce when she was 12, through the death of her college roommate when she was 20, through every hard thing that had ever tried to take her down. And it got her through this, too, because it was not a promise that things would be easy, but a statement that they would not be faced alone. Vivian made 2 decisions in the first week. The first was that she would not tell Adrian about the child. This felt, in the clean light of the Arizona morning, like the only sane choice. Bringing a child into Adrian Vale's world was bringing her into a geography of controlled violence and manage fear, and Vivian's job now was not to manage fear. Her job was to make something safe. The second decision was harder. She called her own attorney, not the one she and Adrian shared, but a woman named Caulfield who had represented her on a personal matter 3 years ago, and she started the process of separating herself legally from Adrian Vale in every way that could be done without triggering the kind of alert that would bring his attention immediately. She moved carefully. She moved slowly. She had learned from 4 years of watching Adrian operate that speed was for people who underestimated what they were up against, and she was done underestimating. Back in Chicago, Adrian Vale was not still. He called her number for 3 days. When she did not answer, he sent Marcus Webb, his head of security, to her sister's apartment, to Donna's office, to 3 other locations he calculated she might have gone to. Marcus came back empty-handed each time, which meant she had not gone to any of the obvious places, which meant she had gone somewhere Adrian had not mapped. That was the first time it occurred to him that he did not know his wife as well as he had assumed. He was not accustomed to that feeling, the specific vertigo of discovering that something he had believed was fully accounted for was in fact not. His organization ran on the principle that Adrian Vale always knew more than the person across from him. He had built 23 years on that principle. He had built it on layers of information and surveillance, and the careful cultivation of sources inside every room that mattered to him. And somehow Vivian had moved through 4 years of marriage, and he had never troubled himself to fully map her. He sat in his office on the 41st floor and looked at the city and thought about this. He was not, he told himself, worried she would surface. She had a life here, work, friends, a routine. She would be angry. She would have gone to someone she trusted, and within a week or 2 the anger would settle into negotiation. and he was excellent at negotiation. He believed this for 11 days. On the 12th day, Silas Voss called. Silas Voss was the kind of problem that Adrian had managed for nearly a decade by keeping him just far enough outside the inner circle to limit his power while just close enough to monitor his moves. They had grown up in the same ecosystem, two men who had built organizations in the same city, which meant they were perpetually in a state of managed antagonism. They were not partners, they were not enemies. They were two structures that leaned against each other, each one preventing the other from falling, while also being the thing most likely to push. Silas was the one Adrian trusted least, which meant Silas was the one Adrian watched most carefully. "Heard your wife left," Silas said. His voice had a particular quality, smooth, in a way that concealed texture, the way lacquered wood conceals grain. "Personal matter," Adrian said. "Of course," a pause. "She take anything with her? Why would that be your concern?" "Professional interest," Silas said. "You know how it is. When there's instability in one organization, it creates opportunities. I just want to make sure you're not distracted." It was a warning and an assessment and a declaration of intent, all delivered in the polished grammar of a man who never said directly what he meant. Adrian had been having this conversation with Silas Voss for 9 years in various forms. "I'm not distracted," Adrian said. "Good," Silas said. "Good." He hung up. Adrian put the phone down and looked at the window and thought about the word opportunities and what it meant in Silas Voss's mouth. It meant Silas was already moving. Adrian spent the next week running two things simultaneously, a quiet search for Vivian and a very careful reassessment of every point where his organization might be exposed if Silas decided to apply pressure. He found 3 vulnerabilities he hadn't fully accounted for. He began shoring them up. He did not panic because he did not panic. Panic was for people who had not spent 23 years making decisions in high-pressure situations. But he worked with a focus that his inner circle recognized as the Adrian who was genuinely concerned, which was a different creature from his everyday operational self. He found nothing on Vivian for 6 weeks. Not a credit card trace, not a cell signal, not a name in a hotel registry. She had gone somewhere outside his maps, and she had gone there with discipline, and every day that passed without a trace made him revise his understanding of who his wife actually was. Meanwhile, 70 miles outside Tucson, the woman he was trying to find was sitting in her grandmother's garden in the January sunshine, 6 months pregnant, drinking herbal tea and reading a novel she had bought at a used bookstore in town, feeling not happy exactly, but something in the neighborhood of solid, grounded, like a woman who had made a decision and was living in the center of it. She had a doctor in Tucson, not under her own name, and Mara drove her to every appointment in an ancient Subaru that had a cracked windshield and a particular rattle in the left rear that Mara had been meaning to fix since 2019. The baby was healthy. The baby was in fact a girl, which was what Vivian had suspected, and knowing it made her feel something expand in her chest that she did not have a clean word for, but that she associated with the particular sensation of arriving somewhere after a long drive. She was going to name her Lena. She had not told Adrian she was pregnant. That much was clear, but she had told him even less than that. She had not told him she was alive in any specific way. She had not told him where she was. She had not told him that somewhere in the Arizona desert his daughter was growing, and that his daughter had no idea who he was, and that Vivian Cross intended with everything she had to keep it that way. She allowed herself, sometime in the quiet hours of the Tucson night, to think about what Adrian was doing. She allowed herself to think about Marcus Webb and the search she knew was happening and the resources Adrian would apply to finding her. She was not naive enough to believe he had simply accepted her absence. Adrian Vale did not accept absence. He resolved it. But she had been more careful than he expected her to be, and she had help she had not advertised, and she was further outside his world than he had ever imagined she would go. The question was not whether he would eventually find her. The question was what he would do when he did. She thought about this. She thought about it honestly, the way Mara had taught her, not the comfortable version, but the actual one. And she thought, there are 2 possible Adrians. There is the Adrian who realizes that a child changes the mathematics of everything, and responds by trying to fold that child into his world, to possess her the way he possesses everything he considers his. And there is the other Adrian, the one she had seen, rarely and briefly, in unguarded moments over 4 years, The Adrian who was capable of being struck by something larger than his own machinery. She did not know which one would show up. She suspected she was not the only one who didn't know. What she knew was this: she was having Lena. She was building something quiet and real and unglamorous in the Arizona desert. She was doing it without his money, without his name, without any of the $50,000 she had left on his side of the marble table. She was doing it with Mara's soup and a cracked windshield and a used bookstore and a doctor who did not know her real name. She was doing it the only way she had ever done anything that mattered by herself, on her own terms, carrying the full weight of it. Outside, the desert went on in every direction. The saguaros stood in the last of the winter light, old and unhurried and entirely themselves. Lena kicked. Vivian put her hand on her stomach and sat very still. "I know," she said quietly. "I know. Part 2, Lena Cross came into the world at 4:17 in the morning on a Thursday in late March, in a hospital in Tucson that smelled like antiseptic and old carpet, in a delivery room where the overhead light had a faint flicker that nobody had gotten around to fixing. Mara was there. She held Vivian's hand through the last 2 hours, not talking much, just present in that particular Mara, way solid and unmoving and entirely unfrightened by the mess and noise of it. Because Mara Cross had been through enough hard things in her 71 years to understand that most of the hard things were just life insisting on itself. Vivian was not elegant about the labor. She was loud in the last hour, and she said things she would not repeat in polite company. And at one point, she told the attending nurse, a patient woman named Terry, that she hated everyone in the room, which Terry accepted with the professional equanimity of someone who had heard worse by 9A. On a Tuesday, and then Lena was there. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Dark hair, wet and flat against her head. A mouth that opened and produced a sound that was less a cry and more a declaration, sharp and indignant, like she had strong opinions about the transition she'd just been asked to make. Vivian held her and did not cry. She had expected to cry. Instead, she felt something settle in her, deep and structural, the way a foundation sets, and she looked at this small and furious person and thought, "I will not let anything touch you that I can stop." Mara looked at Lena over Vivian's shoulder and said, "There she is?" That was all. It was enough. They stayed in the hospital for 2 days. Vivian used the name she had been using for her medical appointments. Not a dramatic alias, just her maternal grandmother's maiden name, paired with her own first name, a combination that existed in no database Adrian Vale's people had any reason to search. She paid in cash through the arrangement Caulfield had set up. She signed the paperwork with a steady hand. On the second morning, a nurse brought the birth certificate form. Vivian looked at the line for father's name for a long time. The pen in her hand, the blank space on the form, she left it empty. She drove back to Mara's house on a Saturday with Lena in a car seat they had bought at a second-hand shop in November, and Mara drove because Vivian was not yet steady enough, and the desert spread out around them, gold and enormous in the morning light, and Vivian sat in the passenger seat looking out the window and felt the immensity of what came next settle over her like weather. She was 34 years old. She had a newborn daughter. She had approximately $60,000 in a separate account that Adrian had no access to money. She had moved carefully over 8 months through channels Caulfield had arranged. She had her grandmother's house and her grandmother's competence and the particular stubbornness she had inherited from a long line of women who had refused to be smaller than their circumstances required. It was not a lot. It was also not nothing. The first 3 months with Lena were what they were exhausting in a way that did not resemble any other kind of tired Vivian had experienced. The bone-deep particular depletion of someone who is responsible for another person's survival on 2 hours of sleep. She nursed, and she did not sleep, and she nursed again, and she sat in the rocking chair. Mara had pulled from the back room at 3 in the morning, and she looked at Lena's face in the low lamplight and thought about nothing at all, which was its own strange gift. Mara took the 4 a.m. shift 3 nights a week without being asked. She would appear in the doorway of the nursery, the second bedroom that had been converted over the course of Vivian's pregnancy. With the quiet efficiency Mara applied to everything, and she would say, "Go sleep," and Vivian would go sleep, and Mara would sit in the rocker and hold Lena with the practiced ease of a woman who had raised 2 children of her own and helped raise several more besides. Vivian's attorney called in April with an update on the divorce proceedings. Caulfield had filed in Arizona under the assumption of irreconcilable differences, using a service address that ran through her firm. Adrian's attorneys had responded. Of course they had responded. With a counterclaim that was, in Caulfield's words, aggressive but not yet nuclear, which meant Adrian had not yet decided whether to fight or to find her, which meant he was still calculating. He'll want to locate you before he commits to a strategy, Caulfield said. Right now his team is filing motions, but it's procedural. They're buying time. How long do we have? Vivian asked. Months, maybe. Depends on how motivated he is. He's motivated, Vivian said. Then less months. She sat with that information and did not panic, because panic was not useful, and she had learned, in the past 6 months, that she was better at not panicking than she had previously given herself credit for. She was not the woman who fell apart. She had always been steadier than the people around her tended to assume, possibly because she was quiet about it, and quietness in women was too often mistaken for fragility. In Chicago, Adrian Vale was losing ground. It did not happen all at once, it never did, in the kind of organization he ran. It happened in the accumulation of small things that should not have been small. A shipment intercepted on the south side that his people could not explain. A city councilman who had been reliably available for the past 8 years suddenly unreachable. A meeting with the Hargrove family, the primary distribution network for the eastern corridor of his operation, that was rescheduled twice and then quietly canceled without explanation. Mark's Webb brought him these reports one by one, and Adrian listened to each one with the flat attention of a man who is mapping a pattern and not yet ready to name it. It's Voss, Marcus said. On a Wednesday in May, in Adrian's office, with the city spread out below them, and the lake gray in the late spring afternoon. Tell me what you know, Adrian said. He's been meeting with the Hargrove people. Separately, off the usual channels, 3 times in the past month that we can confirm. Marcus put a photograph on the desk Rainey, taken from distance but clear enough. Raymond Hargrove and a man in a dark coat outside a restaurant in Logan Square. That's Voss's man Decker. He runs the northern contracts. Adrian looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he set it down. What does Hargrove want? He said. Better terms, probably. Voss is offering something we're not. What are we not offering? Marcus was quiet for a moment, which meant what he was about to say was something Adrian would not enjoy hearing. Stability, Marcus said. Word is people are nervous. The divorce filing went through some channels it shouldn't have. There are people who know your wife left, who know you haven't found her, and they're reading it as... He stopped. As what? Adrian said, flat. Not a question. As you being distracted. As the house having cracks. Adrian was quiet, the city below. The gray lake. A barge moving very slowly toward the horizon. Set up a meeting with Hargrove, he said. Directly. This week. He'll meet, Adrian said. Because the alternative to meeting with me is continuing to meet with Silas Voss. And Raymond Hargrove has been doing business with this organization for 11 years, and he is not stupid enough to believe that Voss would keep him as comfortable as I have. Set the meeting. Marcus left. Adrian turned to the window. He stood there for a long time. He was thinking about Vivian. He thought about her more than he intended to, more than he would have admitted to Marcus or to anyone else in his organization. Because thinking about his wife, who had walked out with a suitcase and vanished, was not a posture that inspired confidence. But he thought about her. He thought about the way she had set the folder back on his side of the table. The specific economy of that gesture. Not dramatic, not trembling. Not the performance of a woman building to a scene. Just no. Just, your empire means nothing to me. He had not expected that. He had expected tears or anger or negotiation. He had married a woman he believed he understood, and she had revealed, in a single gesture, that he had understood nothing at all. He did not yet know she had kept the child. He did not yet know about Lena. The meeting with Raymond Hargrove happened on a Friday evening, at a private room in a steakhouse in Sus that Adrian effectively owned through a series of holding companies. Hargrove was 62, heavyset, with the careful dress of a man who had spent his life trying to look more legitimate than he was. He came alone, which was either a sign of trust or a sign that he had already made his decision, and the meeting was procedural. Adrian read him in the first 30 seconds. The way Hargrove's eyes moved around the room before he sat down. The way he accepted the drink that was poured for him without touching it. The particular quality of his stillness, not the stillness of a man who was comfortable, but the stillness of a man who was braced. Raymond, Adrian said. Adrian, Hargrove's hands were flat on the table. I appreciate you making time, of course. Adrian smiled the smile he used for these situations, warm enough to be readable as genuine, controlled enough to convey that the warmth was a choice. We've known each other too long for scheduling to be a problem. Right. Hargrove moved slightly in his chair. I wanted to talk about the spring projections. There are some adjustments to the Eastern Corridor that I think are worth discussing. Is this your conversation or Silas Voss's? The bluntness landed the way Adrian intended. Not as an accusation, but as a clarification, a knife set on the table rather than drawn. Hargrove's face did not change much, but his hands pressed slightly flatter against the table. Mine, Hargrove said, Raymond. A pause. Hargrove picked up his drink. Put it back down without drinking. He approached me, Hargrove said. 3 months ago. I told him I wasn't interested. He approached again in April and in May. Another pause. Longer. I listened, Hargrove said. I'm not going to pretend I didn't listen. What did he offer you? 15% better margin on the Eastern Corridor. Guaranteed for 2 years. That's a number Voss cannot sustain. I know that. Then what did he actually offer you? Hargrove looked at him. In the low light of the private room, the man looked tired in a way that was not just physical. The tired of someone who has been doing a difficult thing for a long time and is beginning to feel the weight of it add up. He offered me the impression that your situation was changing, Hargrove said. That there were structural issues, that the personal situation. He stopped. Say it, Adrian said. Still calm, still warm, the smile still in place. That your wife leaving created instability. That people who depend on your organization should be looking at their options. Silence. Adrian reached for his own drink and took a measured sip and set the glass down with the particular precision of a man who is controlling the speed of his own reaction. What do you believe? Adrian said. I believe, Hargrove said carefully, that I have a business to protect, and that protecting it means not being on the wrong side of a structural shift. There is no structural shift. Then show me that, Hargrove said. The exhaustion sharpened briefly into something more direct. Adrian, I'm not your enemy. I never have been. But I need not reassurance. I need evidence. I need to see the operation running the way it ran 18 months ago. And if you see that, then we don't have a problem. Adrian studied him. The man was telling the truth, or his version of it, which was close enough. Hargrove was not an ideological person. He was a practical one. He would go where the security was, and right now the security did not look like Adrian Vale. Give me 60 days, Adrian said. I'm not in a position to 30 days. The warmth in his voice dropped by a single degree. Barely perceptible. But Hargrove felt it. 30 days, and you see the Eastern Corridor running better than it did 18 months ago. After that, if you still want to have a conversation with Silas Voss, that is your choice to make. But I think you will find at that point that the conversation is unnecessary. Hargrove looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his drink and finally took a sip. 30 days, he said. Adrian drove home that night with Marcus in the front seat and the city moving past the windows, and something turning over in his mind that he could not fully name yet, a feeling like standing in a room and sensing that the floor is not as solid as. It appears that there is a space beneath the surface that has not been accounted for. He was not afraid, but he was for the first time in a long time aware of how many things he had left unexamined. He had built his organization on the principle of total information. He had built it on knowing things before the people around him knew them, on being 3 moves ahead in every room. And somehow, in his own home, in his own marriage, he had been operating blind. He thought about this as the city went past. He thought about the woman who had left and the child he did not know existed, and the empire that was beginning, at its edges, to develop the first hairline fractures. He thought about what it meant that a man who controlled a criminal organization spanning 3 states and generating 9 figures annually could not tell you, with any confidence, where his wife had gone. He was going to find her. He had not stopped pursuing that. But something in the way Hargrove had said personal situation, the careful distance of those words, the way the man had chosen them, the way you choose not to step on something you're not sure of stayed with him. It stayed with him in a way that felt like a warning he was not yet reading clearly. 6 weeks after Lena was born, Vivian began to feel something she had not expected, the specific restlessness of a competent person with no professional outlet. She loved Lena with the complete and somewhat terrifying love of a new mother. She was not confused about that, but she also had a brain that needed work, and the foundation she had run in Chicago was not running anymore. She had resigned, cleanly and quietly, through a letter that had been worded carefully enough to avoid triggering immediate legal complications, and she was in Tucson, living on savings with a grandmother and a newborn, and she needed to build something. She called Caulfield. "I need to work," she said, remotely. "Something in nonprofit management or grant administration, under my current name." "That's manageable," Caulfield said. "I can put you in touch with a colleague who runs a consulting firm. Foundations across the Southwest hire remote administrators. It's legitimate, documented, and nothing about it leads back." "How quickly?" 2-3 weeks, do it." By June, Vivian was working 12 hours a week remotely for a conservation foundation based in Flagstaff, managing their grant reporting documentation. It was not challenging work by the standard of what she had done in Chicago, but it was real and it paid, and it meant she was building a life rather than simply waiting for one to arrive. Mara watched all of this with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had always known her granddaughter was going to be fine, even in the periods when Vivian herself was less certain of it. "You're getting your color back," Mara said one evening in July. They were on the back porch, Lena asleep in the bassinet Mara had angled to catch the breeze. The desert evening was turning from orange to purple, the colors extravagant and indifferent, the way the desert always was beautiful without asking you to acknowledge it. "I feel more like myself," Vivian said. "You feel more like what you actually are," Mara corrected, "which is a person who does things, not a person who waits for things to be done to her." Vivian looked at her grandmother. "Were you ever afraid for me? When I married him?" Mara was quiet for a moment. A hawk crossed the darkening sky, unhurried. "I was afraid of what you thought you needed from him," Mara said finally. "The security, the stability. Those things aren't wrong to want. But you were going after them, in a form that had conditions attached you hadn't read all the way through." "Why didn't you say that?" "I said it once," Mara said. "You were 29 and in love, and I was your grandmother and not your mother, and some things a person has to find out by living them." She looked at Vivian steadily. "You lived it. You found out. That's not failure. That's just how education works sometimes." Vivian looked out at the desert and felt something loosen that had been tight for a long time. In August, Marcus Webb found the trail. It was not Vivian's doing. She had been genuinely careful, more careful than Adrian had expected. But it was not possible to be invisible forever when the person looking for you had the resources Adrian Vale commanded. The trail came through a small error, the kind that happens when you have been safe for long enough to relax slightly. A medical billing code on an insurance form that linked to a provider network in southern Arizona, cross-referenced against the name variation Caulfield had been using. Marcus brought it to Adrian on a Tuesday morning. He did not say where Vivian was. He did not have a specific address yet, but he said Arizona Southern, and he said the insurance trace suggested she had received medical care in the Tucson metro area within the past 6 months. "Medical care," Adrian said. "That's the flag," Marcus said. "The specific code," he paused. He was reading from a document. He was not a man who paused often, Adrian. "The billing code is for obstetric services." The room was very quiet. Adrian looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with the expression of a man who has just delivered something irreversible and knows it. "She's pregnant," Adrian said, Marcus said. "Or the timing suggests she delivered. The code is postnatal. She had the baby." Marcus said nothing, which was answer enough. Adrian sat very still. The way he sat when he was not controlling his stillness, but had simply stopped when something had entered through whatever space he kept between himself and the world, and landed somewhere he had not prepared. He had told her to handle it. He had given her $50,000 and a clinic card, and told her to handle it, and she had walked out of their apartment and driven to Arizona, and had the child anyway. And then she had been in Arizona for 8 months, raising his child in a place he couldn't find. And she had done all of this without making a single mistake for 8 months. And the only reason he knew now was an insurance billing code. "Find her," he said. His voice was entirely level. "Full address. I want it within 48 hours. "We'll have it," Marcus said. He did. The address came through on a Thursday, a house on a 2-lane road outside Tucson, registered to Amar Cross, age 71, who was the maternal grandmother of one Vivian Cross, née Pemberton, formerly Vivian Vale by marriage. Adrian looked at the address for a long time. Then he looked at the aerial photograph. Marcus had pulled the single-story house, the terracotta tile, the old saguaro in the front yard. He thought about $50,000 on a marble table. He thought about your empire means nothing to me. He thought about 8 months of a child existing in the world that he had not known about. He picked up the phone and called Silas Voss. Not because he trusted Voss. He did not trust Voss any further than he could see him clearly. But because the call he was about to make was the kind that told you everything about where a man's loyalties actually lived, and Adrian needed to know before he made his next move exactly how close Silas had gotten to his perimeter. Voss answered on the second ring. He always answered quickly. He monitored his incoming calls the way a spider monitors vibration, attentive to every frequency. "Adrian," he said. The warmth in his voice was constructed, layered over something else the way paint covers old wallpaper. "I wanted to let you know," Adrian said, "that the personal situation you mentioned in May has been resolved." A beat. Good to hear. And the Eastern Corridor is running at 18% above where it was last spring. This was a lie, or nearly one. It was running at 11% above, which was meaningful but not dominant. Hargrove sends his regards. This was a blunter lie. Hargrove had said nothing of the sort. "Glad things are stabilizing," Voss said. "They are. We should have dinner soon, absolutely." "Before the end of the month," Adrian said. "I'll have Marcus reach out to set it up." He hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he called Marcus. "After you find the address," he said, "I want a complete breakdown of every point of contact between Voss's people and anyone in our network. Every meeting, every call you can document, every name. I want it by the end of the week. That's a significant piece of work," Marcus said. "Then you should start now." He put the phone down and looked at the aerial photograph of the house in Arizona again. He was going to go there. He had not decided yet what he was going to say when he arrived, or what he wanted the outcome to be, which was, he recognized, deeply unlike him. Adrian Vale always knew what outcome he was building toward before he began. The not knowing was new and uncomfortable, and he did not like it. But he was going to go. He booked a flight for the following Tuesday. He told Marcus he was taking 4 days for personal business. He did not explain further, because he never explained further, and Marcus did not ask, because Marcus had been with him long enough to understand when the line was. He landed in Tucson on a clear September morning and drove a rental car south on the interstate, and then off onto a 2-lane road, and then down a gravel driveway toward a single-story house with a cracked windshield Subaru parked outside and saguaro in the front yard that was taller than the house by several feet. He sat in the rental car at the end of the driveway for a moment. He could see through the front window a light on inside, a figure moving in what appeared to be the kitchen. He got out of the car. He had barely reached the edge of the front path when the door opened. Not Vivian. A woman in her 70s, gray braid, standing in the doorway with a particular stillness of someone who had been watching the driveway for a while and had decided, some minutes ago, exactly how this moment was going to go. "You'd be Adrian," she said. "I'm looking for Vivian," he said. "I know who you're looking for." Mara Cross looked at him the way the desert looked at everything, without judgment and without particular interest, just the flat assessment of something that had been there longer than whatever it was regarding. "She knows you're here. She's deciding." "Deciding what?" "Whether to come to the door." Mara stepped back from the doorway. Not an invitation more, of a neutral clearing of space. "She'll come or she won't. That's her business." He waited. 2 minutes. 3. He stood on the path in front of Mara Cross's house in the September Arizona heat and waited. Then he heard footsteps. Vivian came to the door. She was thinner than he remembered, or maybe differently arranged. The roundness of pregnancy was gone, and underneath it, she looked stripped down, not diminished but essential, like a sentence, with all the unnecessary words taken out. She was not wearing the kind of clothes she had worn in Chicago. She was wearing jeans and a plain shirt, and her hair was in a braid like her grandmother's, and she had a look on her face that was not anger, and was not warmth, and was not forgiveness. It was something more. Complicated and less named than any of those things. She did not say his name. She looked at him from the doorway and waited. He looked back at her, and behind her, through the window above the kitchen sink, he could see a small photograph on the refrigerator. A baby, dark-haired, mouth open, and something moved in his chest that was entirely foreign to him. like a gear he had no name for engaging for the first time. I know, he said. I know about the baby. Something changed in Vivian's face. Not fear, not surprise, closer to a kind of bracing, the way you brace when something inevitable arrives. Her name is Lena, Vivian said. I want to see her. No, Vivian said. Flat, quiet, the same way she had said it at the kitchen table with the clinic card between them. She's my daughter. She is. Vivian's voice did not waver. And you told me to handle it, so I did. That's not. You gave me $50,000 and a clinic address, Adrian. She said it without heat, which was, he understood, the most damaging way to say it. You made your position clear. I made mine. I handled it the way I decided to handle it. She's mine too, he said. Go home, Vivian said. She closed the door. He stood on the path for a long moment. The desert was entirely indifferent around him. The saguaro stood in the afternoon light, old and completely unmoved. His phone rang. He looked at it. Marcus. The name on the screen. He answered. We have a problem, Marcus said. His voice was different, compressed, the particular compression of a man delivering something he would rather not deliver. Voss moved faster than we thought. He's not just meeting with Hargrove anymore. He has a source inside our financial structure, someone who's been feeding him documentation for the past 3 months. Adrian said nothing. It gets worse, Marcus said. The source sent him records, not operational financial. The kind of financial records that, if they ended up in the wrong hands, federal hands, Adrian said, yes. A pause. Adrian, if Voss moves this documentation, we are not looking at a competitive problem. We are looking at a criminal exposure situation that could... I understand what it could do, Adrian said. There's more. Voss knows about the child. Marcus's voice dropped. I don't know how. But he knows, and he knows she's in Arizona. Adrian stood very still on the gravel path outside Mar across his house. The afternoon sun hammered down. The saguaro cast its long, thin shadow across the yard. How long before he moves, Adrian said. I don't know. Days, maybe. A week at most. Adrian looked at the closed door in front of him. Behind it, his daughter existed in a house that Silas Voss now knew the location of. His daughter, who was named Lena, who had dark hair, whose face he had seen in a photograph on a refrigerator door and had not yet seen in person, was inside that house with her mother and her great-grandmother, and the most dangerous man in Adrian Vale's world now knew exactly where they were. He had come to Arizona to find Vivian. He had found her. And now the finding had made everything worse in a way that could not be undone, because Silas Voss had been watching him watch her, and now Voss had what he needed. A pressure point, a lever. The thing that Adrian Vale would do anything to protect, now exposed and vulnerable in a house on a gravel road with a cracked windshield Subaru in the driveway. He had no moves that did not put them in danger. He had no way to walk back the knowledge that he had led Voss directly here. He had been so focused on finding her that he had not considered, not fully, what finding her would cost. He stood in the September heat with the phone in his hand and felt, for the first time in 23 years, the specific vertigo of a man who has run out of moves he can make on his own terms. Part 3. Adrian did not go back to Chicago that night. He booked a room at a mid-range hotel 6 miles from Mara's house, not the kind of place a man of his resources would typically occupy, but he was not thinking about his resources. He was thinking about the phone call from Marcus and the photograph on the refrigerator and the specific way Vivian had said her name is Lena before closing the door. The way you say something true to someone who has forfeited the right to know it. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed in his shirt and jacket and did not take his shoes off. He looked at the beige carpet and the wood laminate dresser and the television he had not turned on, and he ran the problem the way he always ran problems, forward and backward simultaneously, mapping the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. The distance was bad. Silas Voss had documentation. Financial records from inside Adrian's own structure, which meant the source was not peripheral, was not a courier or a low-level distributor who had gotten unlucky with his access. The source was someone with proximity to the financial architecture of the organization. Someone Adrian trusted or had trusted, which in his world amounted to the same thing. And Voss knew about Lena. That was the piece that kept snagging. Voss knowing about the child was not the same kind of problem as Voss having financial documentation. The documentation was leverage against Adrian the criminal. The child was leverage against Adrian the man and Silas Voss, who had spent 9 years studying Adrian Vale the way a surgeon studies anatomy, had just discovered that there was a man underneath the criminal after all. Adrian picked up his phone and called Marcus again. The source, he said. You said financial structure. Who has direct access to the offshore accounts and the shell company ledgers? At the level of detail Voss seems to have? Marcus was quiet for a moment. 4 people. Yourself, me Carver in the accounting office. And another pause, shorter this time, but waited. Elaine Marsh. Adrian's financial director for 11 years. The woman who had structured the shell network across 7 jurisdictions. The woman who knew more about where Adrian Vale's money lived and breathed than anyone alive, including Adrian himself. The woman who had been with him since the organization was barely a third of what it was now, who had been compensated exceptionally, who had never given him a single reason to look at her sideways. Run her, Adrian said. I started 20 minutes ago, Marcus said. And her brother-in-law had a federal drug conviction overturned 8 months ago. Sentence commuted. No explanation in the public record. Marcus's voice was careful, the way it got when the facts were doing the work, and he did not need to editorialize. The conviction was handled by a federal prosecutor out of the Northern District. Voss has a documented relationship with a defense attorney in that same district. Adrian sat very still. 8 months ago, the same month Vivian had left. The same period when his attention had been fractured, when the personal situation had created the first visible cracks that Silas Voss had been watching for. While Adrian was looking for his wife, Elaine Marsh had made a decision, and she had been feeding Silas Voss for 8 months, and Adrian had not seen it because he had been looking in the wrong direction. Where is she now, he said. Chicago, her office. It's 9:40. She works late. Don't approach her. Don't let her know we're looking. I need to know every document she accessed in the past 8 months. Already pulling the logs, Marcus said. Adrian, how bad is it? Adrian thought about the question honestly, which he almost never did out loud. It's bad, he said. But it's not finished yet. He hung up. He sat for another moment. Then he put his shoes back on, the way he'd never taken them off, and picked up his jacket and walked out of the hotel room and got in the rental car and drove back down the 2-lane road toward Mara Cross's house. He parked at the end of the driveway. The lights in the house were still on. It was not yet 10 o'clock. He could see a shadow moving behind the front window curtain. He did not get out of the car immediately. He sat and he thought about what he was going to say and how he was going to say it, and he understood that the way he said this next thing would determine whether Vivian Cross opened the door or called the police. He got out and walked up the path and knocked. Not the way he had knocked the first time, 3 measured raps, controlled, the knock of a man who expected to be admitted. This time he knocked once. He waited. Mara opened the door. She looked at him the way she had looked at him the first time the flat desert assessment, and then she looked at his face, and something in her expression shifted by a fraction. She's putting the baby down, Mara said. You'll wait. I need to talk to her now. It's not this isn't about us. Nothing's ever just about us, Mara said, but she stepped back from the door. He stood in the small living room of Mara Cross's house and looked at the evidence of the life Vivian had built here, the books on the shelf, the baby swing in the corner, the photograph on the refrigerator he could see through the kitchen doorway, and several more photographs arranged on a low table, Lena at various stages of the months he had not been present for. He looked at them and felt something move in him. That was not sentiment, he was not a sentimental man, but that was adjacent to it. The recognition of something real that he had not participated in. Vivian came down the hall. She stopped when she saw him. The distance between them was about 12 feet, and the weight of everything unresolved between them occupied every inch of it. You need to leave, she said. Her voice was low. The baby was sleeping, which made it more intense, not less. Silas Voss knows where you are, Adrian said. She looked at him. He has a source inside my financial operation, Adrian said. 8 months of documentation, and he knows about Lena. He knows she exists, and he knows she's here. The silence was complete. Mara had appeared in the kitchen doorway and was listening without pretending not to. How does he know about her? Vivian said. He's been watching me look for you, Adrian said. I led him here. Something passed across Vivian's face. Not fear exactly, or not only fear, the particular expression of a person who has been careful for a very long time. and is now watching the careful thing fail through no fault of their own. It was a look he recognized, distantly, from the faces of people in his organization, when they realized the ground had shifted under them without warning. "What does he want?" she said. "What Voss always wants. Leverage. He'll use Lena to manage me, keep me from moving against him, while he consolidates what he's building. He would use a baby." She said it not as a question, but as a measurement, gauging the specific character of what they were dealing with. "He would use anything," Adrian said. "That's who he is." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. He held the look. He did not look away, and he did not dress the situation up, because she would see through it, and because she deserved, at minimum, the undecorated truth. "What are you going to do?" she said. He had thought about this for the 6 miles back up the 2-lane road. He had thought about it sitting in the parking lot of the hotel, with his shoes still on. He had thought about it the way he thought about hard problems from the outside in, stripping each layer, until you reach the actual core of it. "I don't know yet," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said to her in 4 years of marriage, possibly longer. She turned and went to the kitchen table and sat down. She put both hands flat on the table surface, the same gesture, he realized, that Hargrove had made at dinner, the gesture of a person bracing against the thing in front of them. He sat across from her. Mara stayed in the doorway, which he understood was a decision and not an accident. "Tell me everything," Vivian said. "Don't edit it." He told her. All of it Elaine Marsh, the financial records, the 8 months of exposure, the Hargrove meeting, the 30 days he had bought with a lie, the phone call from Marcus with the word days. He told her about Decker and the Logan Square restaurant and the federal prosecutor connection. He told her about the offshore accounts all companies and the specific nature of what Silas Voss now possessed, which was not just leverage but a weapon, the kind of documentation that, presented to the right federal authority, would dismantle everything Adrian Vale had built across 23 years. He told her this, and he watched her face as he told it, and he saw her processing it with the same concentrated intelligence she had brought to running the foundation, to managing the complex regulatory landscape of nonprofit compliance, to everything she had done in their shared life that he had quietly relied on without ever fully crediting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "So Voss can either use the records to negotiate power with you," she said, "or hand them to federal authorities and destroy you. And either way, he holds Lena over you, as a guarantee that you won't move against him, while he's deciding which option serves him better." "Yes," Adrian said. "And if you go after Voss directly, he releases the documentation. Or he makes a move on Lena. Or both. You built yourself a perfect trap," she said, without bitterness, just stating it. "Yes," he said again. Mar made a sound from the doorway, not words, just a breath, and then went into the kitchen. They could hear the low sound of the kettle being filled. "I need to move you," Adrian said. "You and Lena and Mara. Tonight, ideally. Move us where? Somewhere Voss's people can't find you in the time I need to." "To what?" Vivian said. "What exactly is the plan after you move us, Adrian? What are you going to do that makes any of this safe?" He looked at her. She held it. "I'm working on it," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the honest one." She stood up. She walked to the kitchen doorway and exchanged a look with Mara that contained an entire conversation he was not party to. Then she turned back. "I'm not running," she said. "Mara's 71 years old. This is her home. I'm not loading a newborn into a car at 10 o'clock at night because you made a mistake that led a dangerous man to my door." "Vivian, don't." The single word was clean and hard. "Don't use the tone you use when you're managing a situation. I'm not a situation to be managed. You want to protect us? Figure out how to actually protect us. And do it without making our lives smaller in the process." He absorbed this. He did not argue it because she was not wrong. "I need 24 hours, he said. "I need to get Marcus on the ground here, and I need to establish a perimeter around this property, and I need to make some calls that He stopped. "That I've been avoiding. What calls?" He looked at the table. For the first time in the conversation, he looked away from her. "There's a federal contact," he said. "I've had it for 3 years. A channel. Someone I could use if I ever needed." He stopped again. "If I ever needed a way out." Vivian stared at him. "You've had a federal contact for 3 years. As an insurance policy. I never intended to."
"But you have it."
"Yes." She sat back down. She sat very still for a moment. "And what does using it look like?" It looks like me handing over everything, he said. The financial records, the operational structure, the names, the accounts. 23 years of documentation. He met her eyes. All of it. In exchange for what? Protection for you and Lena. Guaranteed, structured, federal. He kept his voice even. And a reduced sentence for me, which would still be significant. The kettle began to whistle in the kitchen. Mara took it off the heat. Vivian looked at him for a long time. He had been looked at by a lot of people in his life, across tables and negotiations, across rooms and confrontations, across the specific charged space of a situation where something large and dangerous was being decided. He had never been looked at quite this way, like the person looking was seeing him clearly, without any of the framework of fear or respect or self-interest that usually filtered how people saw Adrian Vale, and finding him not monstrous. Just a man who had made 23 years of choices that had brought him to a kitchen table in Arizona at 10 o'clock at night, trying to explain to his estranged wife why his entire life was about to collapse. You'd go to prison, she said. Yes. For how long? I don't know yet. Depends on what I bring them and how useful it is. Could be 7 years. Could be 15. And your organization? Gone, he said. All of it. In a chain reaction that would probably take 6 months to work through the system. Silas Voss would be prosecuted as part of the deal. He's been on federal radar for years. I have documentation on Voss that they'd value more than almost anything else I could offer. She nodded slowly, working through it. He watched her think, the way he used to watch her work when they were first married, before he had stopped watching her at all, with the particular satisfaction of seeing a careful mind moving through a complex problem without flinching. Lena never has to know what you were, she said. She'll know eventually. He paused. That's not something I can control. No, Vivian said. But there's a difference between her knowing from a distance, from history, and her growing up inside it. I know the difference, he said. She stood again. She walked to the far end of the kitchen and stood looking out the window at the dark desert. The light above the sink threw her shadow long behind her. I need you to understand something, she said. She didn't turn around. If you do this, if you make this deal and go to prison, I'm not waiting for you. I'm not holding a space. I'm going to build a life for Lena and for myself that has nothing to do with Adrian Vale's timeline or Adrian Vale's return. I understand that, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it. She turned around. Her face was not soft. It was not cold either. It was the face of a woman who had made a decision in the small hours of a morning in Amarillo and had been living in that decision for 8 months, and who is now being asked to absorb one more thing, not a betrayal, not this time, but a consequence. The long chain of consequences from a man who had spent 23 years making choices, arriving at last at their natural terminus. Make your calls, she said, tonight. If Marcus needs to come down here, call him. But my grandmother doesn't move from this house, and Lena doesn't go anywhere in the dark. She looked at him steadily. Those are my terms. He nodded. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus first. Marcus listened to the summary without interrupting, which was one of his best qualities, and then said he could have 2 men at the property within 3 hours. He said he would personally drive through the night and be there by morning. Then Adrian sat for a moment with the next number in his hand. A number he had memorized 3 years ago and never dialed. A number that belonged to a man named Garrett Finch, whose official title was Senior Investigative Counsel for the Financial Crimes Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, and whose unofficial role, the one that had generated the channel between them, was the federal government's primary architect of negotiated dismantlements of major organized crime structures. Garrett Finch had reached out to Adrian through an intermediary in the winter of 3 years ago. He had made clear, in the careful language of a man who understood exactly how much he was offering, and to whom, that if Adrian Vale ever reached a point where the mathematics of his situation changed, where the calculus of continuation cost more than the calculus of exit, there was a framework available. A structured conversation. A way out that was not clean but was real. Adrian had taken the number and filed it in the part of his mind where he kept things he did not intend to need. He dialed it now. It rang 4 times. He almost expected voicemail. Then this is Finch. Slightly alert, the voice of a man who monitored his phone even at this hour, which meant the number was, as advertised, a genuine channel. This is Vale, Adrian said. A pause, not a long one. Mr. Vale. No surprise in the voice, or if there was surprise, it was the quiet professional variety contained, already being processed into utility. I was beginning to think this call wasn't coming. The mathematics changed, Adrian said. Tell me. He did. He gave Finch the outline, not the full architecture. Not yet. That was for the formal conversation with lawyers present, but enough. The Voss documentation exposure. The 8 months of financial records. The threat to his daughter. Enough to establish that this was not a tactical feint, but a genuine and irreversible opening. Finch was quiet through all of it. When Adrian finished, Finch said, "How quickly can you be in a position to formalize this?" Days, possibly less, depending on Voss's timeline. The child, she's secure right now? I have people coming to the location tonight. We should talk about federal protective arrangements. If what you're describing about Voss is accurate, this needs to move faster than a standard process. It's accurate, Adrian said. I'll make calls tonight, Finch said. I'll need a secure location for a preliminary meeting. Not Chicago. I'm in Tucson, then Tucson tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. I can have 2 people there, a pause. Mr. Vale, you understand that once we begin this conversation formally, there is no version of events where you walk away unchanged. Yes, Adrian said. Everything. Yes, another pause. Shorter, 7 a.m., Finch said. I'll send you the location. Adrian hung up. He put the phone on the kitchen table. Mara Cross, who had been at the far end of the kitchen for most of this, set a mug of tea in front of him without comment, and then took her own mug and went down the hall to her room. Adrian looked at the mug for a moment. Then he looked up. Vivian was still in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, with her arms crossed, watching him. Did you make the call? She said. Yes, she looked at his face. Something there she was reading, he didn't know what she was finding. Are you afraid? She said. Not cruel, genuine. He thought about lying. He was very good at it. He had been lying in various forms for 23 years. Yes, he said. She nodded. She pushed off from the counter and walked toward the hall. The couch in the living room has a blanket in the cabinet underneath, she said. You can stay until Marcus gets here. After that, she stopped at the doorway. After that, we figure out the rest. She went down the hall. He sat alone in Mara Cross's kitchen, with the tea going cold in front of him, and the desert dark outside the window, and the entire structure of the life he had built beginning, somewhere in the legal infrastructure of the federal government, to come apart. He thought about Elaine Marsh in her Chicago office, running a betrayal she believed he didn't know about yet. He thought about Silas Voss, somewhere in the city, holding documentation, making calculations, believing he was days away from either neutralizing Adrian Vale permanently or turning him into a subordinate. He thought about what Voss would do when he understood what Adrian had set in motion. Voss would move immediately. He would not negotiate, would not wait for the formal machinery to assemble itself. He would move fast and hard toward the one pressure point he had found, which was the house on the 2-lane road outside Tucson, where a woman and a baby and a 71-year-old grandmother were asleep. Adrian looked at the time. Marcus was 3 hours out. Finch's people were not arriving until morning. The 2 men Marcus was sending would be at the property in 3 hours, and 3 hours was not the same thing as covered. He got up. He went to the front window and looked out at the gravel driveway and the dark desert road, and the very large absence of anyone between this house and whatever Silas Voss decided to send. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize, a burner, untraceable by design. The message was 4 words. I know you're there. He stood at the window with the phone in his hand and felt the last inch of runway disappear beneath him, and understood that the decision he had just made on a kitchen table in Arizona was no longer a decision he could take back. Was no longer something he could calculate his way around, or negotiate into a more comfortable shape, was no longer anything other than what it was, the only move left to a man who had finally run out of moves that served only himself. He typed back, then come and get them. He put the phone in his pocket. He went to the couch, but he did not lie down. He sat facing the front door with his jacket still on and his shoes still on, and the particular stillness of a man who has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, and he waited for morning. Part 4. The first car came down the gravel road at 2:14 in the morning. Adrian heard it before he saw it, the specific sound of tires on gravel, moving too slowly. The kind of slow that is not a person lost or uncertain, but a person trying not to be heard. He was off the couch, before the headlights cleared the bend, moving to the side window, staying off the center line of the glass. One car, dark. It stopped 50 yards from the house and killed the lights. He called Marcus. "Where are you?" he said. Not a question. 90 minutes out. Marcus's voice had the compressed quality of a man already moving fast. "I pushed the other two ahead. They should be 20 minutes behind you. I have a vehicle on the road." Dark sedan stopped 50 yards north of the property. "How many?" "Can't see yet, Adrian. Get the women to the back of the house." He hung up. He went down the hall quickly, not running made noise, and knocked on Mara's door twice, sharp. Mara opened it in under 5 seconds. She was dressed. She had not, he realized, gone to sleep at all. She looked at his face and said nothing. "Back bedroom," he said. "You and Vivian and the baby." Now. Mara moved. She went to Vivian's room, and he heard the low, urgent sound of her voice through the wall, and then Vivian's voice alert, not groggy, the voice of someone who had not been sleeping deeply, and then movement. He went back to the front of the house. The sedan was still there. In the darkness, he could make out 2 figures that had emerged from the vehicle and were moving along the edge of the road toward the property, not on the gravel, staying on the dirt shoulder where footsteps were quieter. 2. But 2 was not the number Silas Voss sent when he was serious. 2 was the number you sent to watch. He went to the kitchen. He opened the cabinet above the refrigerator, where Mara kept a lockbox. He had seen it when he'd been standing at the counter earlier. The kind of lockbox a woman who lived alone in the desert kept because the desert was beautiful and enormous and not always safe. He looked at it. He could not open it without the combination. Mara appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Cabinet above the fridge," she said. She crossed the kitchen and entered a 4-digit combination and opened the box. Inside a .38 revolver, clean and maintained, loaded. She took it out and looked at him. "You know how to use it," she said. Not a question. Yes, she handed it to him. "You bring this back to me without holes in my house," she said, "and we'll call it even." He almost said something. Didn't. Mara went back down the hall. Adrian checked the revolver. Full cylinder. He moved back to the front window and looked out. The 2 figures had stopped at the edge of the property line, the low decorative fence that marked the boundary of Mara's yard. They were not advancing. They were watching the house. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again. 2 more on the back road. He read it twice. Then he understood this was not from Voss. The number had a 520 area code, local Arizona. He typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in under 10 seconds, Finch. "I have eyes on the property." "Stay inside." He stared at the screen. Finch had people here already. Not at 7 a. Not at the formal meeting. Here. Now at 2:14 in the morning, which meant Finch had anticipated that Voss would move fast and had positioned assets before the formal conversation even began. It meant Finch had been watching this situation for longer than the phone call had suggested. He thought about that for exactly 3 seconds and then let it go, because the 2 figures at the property line were moving again, not toward the house, but laterally, one going left and one going right, which was a flanking pattern, which meant they were not watchers. After all, they were the advance of something larger. Texted Finch, flanking movement, 2 on north perimeter. "Finch, we see them. Do not engage. Keep the family in the back." He moved down the hall. Vivian was in the back bedroom with Lena. The baby was awake but quiet, making the small snuffling sounds of a baby who has been picked up and held, and Vivian was sitting on the edge of the bed, with Lena against her chest, and her eyes on Adrian, the moment he came through the door. Mara was in the corner with her back to the wall, which was tactically correct positioning, and told him that Mara Cross had dealt with threatening situations before in her 71 years and had retained the information. "There are federal assets on the property," he said quietly. "Finch moved faster than I expected. We have coverage." "How many are outside?" Vivian said. "At least 4. Possibly more coming." Lena made a sound. Vivian shifted her, pressed her closer. She looked at Adrian with an expression that was not panic. He had half expected panic, and he realized now that was insulting, that he had underestimated her even now, but was instead the focused, cold alertness of a person who has decided that their job in this moment is to hold the baby and not move. "Is Finch enough?" she said. "I don't know," he said. A sound from outside, not the front, the back. Something against the kitchen window. Adrian turned and went back down the hall fast. The kitchen window was intact. But there was a figure at it visible for 1 second in the gap of the curtain, a face looking in, and then gone. He moved to the side of the window frame, back against the wall, the revolver in his hand. His heart was doing something loud and architectural in his chest that he was actively managing down. His phone buzzed. Finch East Side secured, North still active. Adrian, I need you to not do anything for the next 4 minutes. 4 minutes. He stood against the kitchen wall and counted his own breathing and listened to the desert outside, which was not silent since it had never been silent. The desert at night had a whole ambient sound that was usually background and was now foreground, every shift and creak and distant movement amplified by attention. 2 minutes in, he heard voices outside. Not Voss's voice, he was not here. Voss never put himself in the physical location of a confrontation. That was for people he paid, but the voice of someone issuing a command, low and sharp, followed by silence. Then a different kind of silence, the silence that follows something being resolved. His phone rang. Finch. North and West clear, Finch said. His voice was level. We have 2 individuals detained. 2 more ran. We're pursuing inside the property, no breach. You're clear to move. I'm not moving Lena in the dark with 2 runners loose. A pause. Fair, Finch said. Sit tight. I'll have confirmation in 10. He did not sit. He stood in the kitchen with the revolver at his side and looked at the curtained window and felt the specific texture of a situation that had been close enough to go another way. The 10 minutes felt like 40. At the end of it, Finch called back and said the 2 runners had been located and detained a quarter mile down the access road. He said there was now 4 federal agents on the property perimeter, and the road was blocked in both directions. Adrian went back to the bedroom. He stood in the doorway. It's clear, he said. Vivian looked at him. She had not moved from the edge of the bed. Lita was asleep against her chest, had slept through the whole thing, the specific profound unconsciousness of a baby who was held and therefore safe. Mara was still in the corner. She met Adrian's eyes and he held up the revolver, and she nodded and he set it on the dresser. Clear how, Vivian said. Federal agents have the perimeter. 4 men detained Voss's people, yes. She let out a breath. Not a shaking breath, a controlled release, the kind you make when you've been holding something in your body for an extended period and are now carefully, deliberately letting it out. She looked down at Lena. She slept through it, Vivian said. Yes. Good, she looked up. Something moved in her face that was not quite gratitude, and not quite anything else he had a name for. Go do what you need to do, she said. We're fine. He nodded. He went down the hall. Marcus arrived at 420A. In a black SUV that came down the gravel road with its lights on and its speed steady, not the slow scrape of surveillance, but the deliberate arrival of a man who had been making a long drive and was not interested in subtlety. He came through the door and looked at Adrian and then around the house and said, You're intact. Finch got here before you did, Adrian said. Marcus absorbed this without visible reaction, which was one of the things Adrian had valued about him for 11 years. How long has he had people on you? Longer than tonight. Marcus nodded slowly. So the conversation with Finch isn't new. The conversation is new. The surveillance isn't. Another nod. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. The months of the Voss situation had put something additional in his face. The specific aging that happened to people who managed other people's catastrophes for a living. There's something else, Marcus said. Elaine, she made a move tonight. 3 hours ago. She accessed the backup archive, the off-site ledgers. The full set. He looked at Adrian steadily. She transferred a copy to an external server. The destination address traces to a Voss holding company in Panama. Adrian sat down across from him. She wasn't just feeding him operational data, Marcus said. She sent him the archive, everything. 23 years of financial structure, every account, every shell entity, every transfer record. He paused. Adrian, if Voss presents that to a federal contact before you do. He won't, Adrian said. You don't know. He won't because Voss doesn't want to hand this to federal authorities, Adrian said. He wants to use it. He wants to walk into a room with me and put it on the table and tell me the terms of the arrangement he's building. That's what Silas Voss does. He doesn't destroy assets. He acquires them. He looked at the table. Which means I have a window. Small, but real. How small? Days. Maybe less now. After tonight. When Voss finds out his people were detained by federal agents at this location, he'll know I've opened the channel. He'll accelerate. Then we accelerate, Marcus said. Yes, Adrian looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the desert was beginning to go from black to the deep blue of pre-dawn, the first suggestion of another day, arriving whether or not anyone was ready for it. Marcus. When this is done, when the formal process starts, you're going to need to make decisions about your own exposure. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I know that. I'm not going to. I know, Marcus said. You don't have to. He looked at his hands on the table. I've been with you for 11 years. I know what the books look like. I know what I'm in for. He looked up. I'm not asking you for anything. I just want to know that when you sit across from Finch and the lawyers, you're telling them everything. Not a managed version, everything. Yes, Adrian said. Then I'll figure out the rest, Marcus said. They sat in the kitchen until the sun came up. Mara made coffee at 6 o'clock and set 2 mugs on the table and did not speak. And the 3 of them sat in the early light of the Arizona morning with the particular silence of people who are waiting for something irreversible to begin. At 6:50, Adrian stood up. He put on his jacket. He looked at Marcus. Stay here, he said, with them. Until I'm back. Where's the meeting? Finch will send the location. His phone buzzed as he said it. An address, a federal field office in downtown Tucson, 14 miles away. He showed Marcus the screen. Marcus looked at it and nodded. Adrian went down the hall. He stopped outside the back bedroom door. He knocked once. Come in, Vivian said. She was feeding Lena. She looked up when he came in, and he stood in the doorway and looked at the 2 of them, his daughter's face in full daylight for the first time. Turned slightly toward Vivian's shoulder, dark hair still with that newborn density, eyes closed in the concentrated contentment of a baby being fed. 6 months of a life he had not been present for, assembled in the space of this room. I'm going to the meeting, he said. Vivian looked at him. She did not say anything immediately. What do you need from me? She said. Practical, direct, nothing right now. Caulfield should probably be reachable today. The divorce, he stopped. The divorce proceedings are going to change shape when this becomes public. I want you to have whatever you need from the financial side before the accounts are frozen. I'll have Marcus transfer. I don't want your money, she said. Quiet. Final. I have what I need, she said. I built it myself. That was the point. She looked at him steadily over Lena's head. Make the deal. Tell them everything. Come back and tell me what the sentence looks like and what the timeline is. That's all I need from you today. He nodded. He looked at Lena one more time. He stopped, started again. Can I hold her before I go? A pause. Long enough that he thought the answer was no, and he was preparing to accept that, to turn and leave, and take it on the terms Vivian set, because those were the only terms he had any right to. Sit down, she said. He sat in the chair by the window. Vivian stood and crossed the room and placed Lena in his arms with the careful practiced transfer of a woman who had spent 6 months learning exactly how to do this. He took the weight of her 7 pounds when she was born. More now, the compact density of something small and entirely alive, and he held her the way you hold something you are afraid of dropping. Both hands, full attention, and he looked at her face. She opened her eyes. The eyes of a 6-month-old are not focused, not really, but they land somewhere, and Lena's landed approximately on his face, and she looked at him with the unfiltered assessment of a person who has no framework yet for what anything means, who is simply receiving information about the world, and Adrian Vale, who had looked back at judges and rivals and federal agents and men who wanted him dead with perfect composure for 23 years, looked at his daughter's face and felt something in his chest give way completely. Not dramatically, not with tears, because he was not built for that in any way he knew how to access. Just the specific structural collapse of a man who has spent his entire life building walls around the thing most likely to hurt him, and has discovered too late, and in the wrong order, what he was actually walling out. Vivian watched him. She did not look away. He held Lena for 4 minutes. He counted, because counting was the only way he knew to stay inside the moment, rather than running the next problem. At the end of 4 minutes, Lena made a sound of displeasure and started working toward a complaint, and he stood and handed her back to Vivian with the same careful transfer. Thank you, he said. Vivian said nothing, but she did not look away. He drove to the federal field office in the rental car, with the desert opening up around him in the full morning light, the saguaros casting their thin shadows west, the mountains at the edge of the sky still carrying the blue of early morning on their upper faces. It was a beautiful morning. He registered this the way he was registering a lot of things differently today, not as background, but as something actual, something that was happening regardless of what he intended or controlled. Garrett Finch was already in the conference room when Adrian arrived. He was 50-something, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket that was slightly too large, which was either carelessness or deliberate inconspicuousness. He had two attorneys with him, one a woman who was introduced as the lead federal prosecutor for the Northern District, and one a man who was Finch's own counsel. Adrian had his own attorney on the phone, Harmon, his criminal defense counsel of 8 years, participating remotely from Chicago, his voice coming through a speaker set in the center of the conference table. They began at 7:12 a.m. The preliminary conversation took 40 minutes. Finch laid out the framework, what the government wanted, what they were prepared to offer, the procedural shape of a cooperation agreement. Harmon asked specific questions about sentence reduction parameters. The federal prosecutor answered with the careful precision of someone who had done this many times and was not emotionally invested in any particular outcome. Adrian listened to all of it. He answered the questions they asked. He did not attempt to manage the room the way he managed every other room he had ever occupied, did not work the angles, did not calculate the leverage, did not look for the position from which the negotiation could be bent toward a more favorable result. He told them what they wanted to know. He named names. He described the financial architecture, layer by layer, with the complete and unflinching accuracy of a man who had designed it and knew every seam. He described the shell company network. He described the offshore accounts in 6 jurisdictions. He described the relationship with the Hargrove family and 4 other distribution networks. He described the city officials who had been on retainer. He described the law enforcement contacts who had looked away at specific moments for specific compensation. He described all of it with the methodical completeness of someone doing an inventory, not enjoying it, not performing contrition, just supplying facts to people who needed them. And then he described Silas Voss. He told them about Elaine Marsh and the Panama transfer. He told them about Decker and the Logan Square meetings. He told them about the 9 years of Voss's operation, the Eastern expansion, the political connections in 3 states, the federal prosecutor relationship that had freed Marsh's brother-in-law. He told them about the 4 men who had come to a house on a gravel road outside Tucson the night before. The federal prosecutor stopped writing at one point and looked up at him. "Mr. Vale," she said, "are you giving us Voss's entire structure?" "Yes," he said, "everything you know." "Yes," she looked at Finch. Something passed between them, not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of people who had expected to negotiate for partial information and are being given something significantly larger. The meeting ran for 4 hours. At the end of it, Finch slid a document across the table, not the final agreement, not yet. That would take days and the formal involvement of more lawyers and more review. But a letter of intent. A document that said, in the careful language of federal legal process, that Adrian Vale had entered a cooperation framework, and that from this moment, certain protections and certain obligations applied. Adrian looked at it. Harmon's voice from the speaker said, "I've reviewed the framework. It's as represented. Sign if you're ready." Adrian picked up the pen. He thought about the Carlisle Hotel. He thought about a woman in the photographs and a folder on a marble table and a check for $50,000. He thought about a 4-word text from Silas Voss. "At 2 in the morning, I know you're there." He thought about Lena's eyes finding his face in a chair by a window in a bedroom in Arizona. He signed. The document went back across the table. Finch looked at it, signed his own line, and said, "We'll move on Voss within 48 hours. I need you to be reachable and compliant through the process." "Yes," Adrian said, "the protective arrangement for your daughter and her mother that begins today. 2 agents at the property until the Voss network is fully contained." "Thank you," Adrian said. The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth. He said them anyway. He drove back to Mara's house in the mid-morning light. The drive was the same desert, the same mountains, the same road. It looked different than it had going the other direction, not because anything had changed in the landscape, but because he was carrying something different in his body, now. Some altered weight. The specific density of a man who has just given away the only thing he had been, for 23 years certain of. He pulled up the gravel driveway. Marcus was on the porch. He looked at Adrian when he got out of the car and read something in his face and gave a single nod. Adrian nodded back. He went inside. The house was quiet in the midday way Lena was sleeping again. He could tell by the absence of sound from the back of the house. Mara was in the kitchen. She looked at him when he came in and set a glass of water on the table without comment. He sat down. He drank the water. He looked at the table. Is it done? Mara said. The first part, he said. The rest takes time. Yes, she sat across from him. The kitchen light was plain and ordinary, and the sound of the desert came through the window screen. She looked at him the way she had looked at him, every time without judgment and without particular interest, just the assessment of something that had been there longer than whatever it was regarding. You're afraid of what comes next, she said. Yes. Good, she said. Fear means you understand the stakes. People who aren't afraid of what they've got coming have usually found a way to lie to themselves about it. He looked at her. Have you always said exactly what you mean? Since I was about 45, she said. Took a while to get there. He almost smiled. Almost. Vivian appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the distance between them was still 12 feet and still full of everything unresolved. But the texture of it had changed, was not the weight of deception anymore. Not the dead weight of a man who had been managing a situation, but something rawer and more honest and more difficult to carry, which was the weight of consequence and the beginning, very slow and very uncertain, of accounting for it. How did it go? She said. I signed the letter of intent, he said. The formal agreement takes a few days. Voss will be moved on in 48 hours. There will be federal agents here until then. She nodded. Vivian, he said. He stopped. He looked at the table, then back up at her. He did not know how to say the next thing in any form that didn't sound constructed, because he had spent 23 years in a world where everything that was said was constructed for effect. He tried anyway. I know what I did. I know what the folder on the table was. I know what I cost you. I'm not asking you for anything. I just need you to know that I know. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was very still. I know you know, she said finally. That's what makes it harder. She went back down the hall. He sat in the kitchen with the empty glass and the desert light and the sound of Marcus's voice from the porch talking quietly into a phone. He sat there, and he did not try to solve anything further. Outside, 2 federal agents he did not recognize were walking the perimeter of Mara Cross's yard, moving in opposite directions around the low fence, professional and unhurried, covering the ground between what had happened and what was still coming. 48 hours. Voss would be taken in 48 hours, or Voss would move first, and everything that had been set in motion on a kitchen table at midnight would either hold or it wouldn't. And there was nothing left that Adrian Vale could do to control the outcome except wait, which was the one thing he had never learned to do, and which he was going to have to learn now. Sitting in a kitchen in Arizona with the empire already falling somewhere he couldn't see. Part 5. The 48 hours did not go cleanly. Silas Voss did not wait for federal agents to come to him. He had spent 9 years building an organization precisely because he understood that the moment you wait for something to happen to you is the moment you have already lost. And when his people in Tucson went dark, 2 detained, 2 runners picked up on the access road, he understood within hours what it meant. Not that Adrian had moved against him directly. That would have been manageable. What it sent was something worse. Adrian had opened a door that could not be closed again, and behind that door was the entire weight of the federal government. And Silas Voss had approximately 1 viable move left. He made it at 6 in the morning, before Adrian had left Mara's kitchen table the first time, before the meeting with Finch, before the letter of intent. He called Elaine Marsh. Send it, he said. Elaine Marsh, sitting in her Chicago apartment in the gray early morning, looked at the external stuff she had been holding since the previous night, the complete archive of 23 years of Adrian Vale's financial structure, and she sent it to 2 places simultaneously, the Panama server which Voss controlled, and a second address that Voss had given her 3 weeks ago as a contingency, which she had not asked him to explain, and which he had described only as insurance. The second address was a federal tip line for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Voss had sent the documentation himself anonymously to federal authorities, not to hand Adrian to the government, but to get ahead of whatever deal Adrian was building. If the documentation arrived from an anonymous source before Adrian's cooperation agreement was formalized, the government's leverage over Adrian changed shape. The cooperation had less value if they already had the records. The deal Finch was offering Adrian would become significantly less favorable. The protection arrangement for Vivian and Lena, which was contingent on the value of Adrian's cooperation, would be renegotiated. It was the most Silas Voss move possible, not a frontal attack, not a physical confrontation, but the surgical removal of Adrian's last card. Finch found out at 8:40 a.m., 20 minutes into the meeting with Adrian, when his phone lit up with a message from his office. He excused himself. He came back 5 minutes later and sat down and looked at Adrian with an expression that had changed in a specific way, not hostile, but recalibrated. Voss moved documentation to Finson this morning, Finch said. Anonymous submission. Your financial records. Adrian looked at him. He's trying to devalue your cooperation, the federal prosecutor said. She said it without particular emotion. She was a woman who had spent her career in rooms where bad things happened and had learned to describe them accurately rather than dramatically. If we already have the records, your value as a cooperating witness is diminished. You have them? Adrian said. We have a submission. We haven't verified the contents yet. Then I have a window, Adrian said. Finch looked at him. Explain. Voss sent you financial records, Adrian said. I can give you the key to read them, every shell entity, every jurisdiction, every account number cross-referenced to its operational purpose. Without that key, the records are a document dump. Complex, partially encrypted, requiring months of forensic accounting to interpret. He met Finch's eyes. I can interpret them for you now. This morning, everything Voss just sent you becomes immediately actionable instead of a 6-month project. The prosecutor looked at Finch. Finch looked at Adrian. And in exchange, Finch said, the protection arrangement stands, Adrian said. Unchanged. My daughter and her mother, covered until Voss's network is fully contained. Finch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, start talking. Adrian talked for 3 hours without a break. He walked them through the financial architecture with the systematic precision of its designer, because he had designed it, layer by layer, over 23 years, and there was no one alive who understood it better. He identified every shell entity by its purpose. He named the correspondent banks and the jurisdictional routing and the cleaning mechanisms that moved money from criminal origin to investable asset. He described the specific function of every account in the Panama submission. The prosecutor's 2 associates typed without stopping. Finch listened without interrupting. By 11 o'clock, what Voss had intended as a demolition of Adrian's leverage had become, through the morning's work, the foundation of the most comprehensive organized crime financial prosecution in the Northern District's recent history. When they broke, Finch stepped out to make calls. Adrian sat in the conference room alone for 15 minutes and looked at the wall and felt something that was not relief. It was too soon for relief, and he had too much coming but was something in the direction of solid ground. The specific sensation of having finally stopped moving and being prepared to bear the weight of standing still. Marcus called at noon. Voss is in the wind, Marcus said. He left his Chicago residence at approximately 9 this morning. Private vehicle, no driver. We've lost him. He knows I'm talking, Adrian said. Yes. He'll run or he'll move. Which is he? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He'll move. He's not a runner. You know him, yes. Adrian thought about this. About Mara's house on the gravel road. About the federal agents on the perimeter. About the 6-month-old baby who had slept through a 2A. Incursion because she was held and therefore safe, and who was at this moment in a house that Silas Voss knew the address of, with 2 federal agents outside, and Marcus inside, and whose mother had said we're fine with the specific confidence of a woman who had been fine on her own terms for 8 months and was not going to stop now. He called Finch's direct number. Voss is mobile, he said when Finch answered. He left Chicago this morning. I need confirmation that the Tucson property has active coverage. 2 agents on site, Finch said. I'll add 2 more in the next hour. He's not going to come himself, Adrian said. He doesn't do that. He'll send someone, and whoever he sends will be better than the 4 he sent last night. I understand, Finch said. Do you have enough to move on him now? Before he puts someone else in motion? We're working on the warrant. Work faster, Adrian said. He drove back to Mara's house. He drove the 14 miles in the desert noon heat and pulled up the driveway and saw the 2 federal agents different from the morning's pair, a man and a woman, Positioned at the front corners of the property, Marcus on the porch and Mara's Subaru in its usual spot, and the ordinary persistent beauty of the saguaro in the front yard that he was beginning to feel he'd known for longer than 2 days. Marcus came off the porch when he saw him. "Anything?" Adrian said. "Quiet," Marcus said. "The women are inside. Lena's been fed." Mara made lunch. He paused. "She made you a plate, too." Adrian looked at him. "I know," Marcus said. "She's something else." He went inside. The house smelled like soup again, Mara's soup, which he had now consumed twice and which was one of the most straightforwardly good things he had encountered in recent memory, which was a strange thought to have in the middle of everything else, and which he had anyway. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the plate on the table, bread and soup, set out with the matter-of-fact hospitality of a woman who fed people, because feeding people was what you did when there was a situation, not because the situation deserved comfort, but because people did. He sat down and ate. Vivian came in halfway through. She looked at him eating Mara's soup at Mara's table, and something crossed her face that might, in a different life, in a different sequence of events, have been amusement. She sat across from him with her own coffee. "Finch called me," she said. He explained the protection arrangement. "Good." He said, "You negotiated it back to the original terms." "Yes." She looked at her coffee. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. Voss's move could have given you an out. A reason to renegotiate your own terms first." "Yes." "But you didn't." "No." He looked at her. "It wasn't a hard decision. It was the only decision." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, the desert afternoon was in full force, the high, bright pressure of it. The heat that was not oppressive, but was entirely honest. The way the desert was always honest. Its beauty and its harshness, the same thing expressed differently by the hour. "What happens to Elaine Marsh?" Vivian said. "She'll be picked up today." She had a federal exposure from the brother-in-law situation. Voss used it to turn her. That's a mitigating factor. But she made her choices. He paused. "She's been with me for 11 years. I didn't see it." "Would you have?" Vivian said, "if you'd been paying attention to the right things?" He thought about this honestly. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." She was careful. "People are careful when they're afraid," Vivian said. What was she afraid of? He looked at his soup. "I don't know. I never asked her." He said this without self-pity, just the plain acknowledgement of a gap. "I didn't ask people things like that." Vivian looked at him. She did not say anything to that. She didn't need to. Silas Voss was arrested at 4:17 that afternoon. Not in Chicago, not at any of his registered addresses or known locations. He was arrested at a private airfield 40 miles west of the city, in the process of boarding a charter flight with documentation that identified him as a Canadian import consultant named Raymond Gill. He had 2 bags, a briefcase, and approximately $3 million in bearer bonds. He did not resist. That was the detail that Marcus relayed to Adrian when he called that Voss, when the federal agents appeared at the airfield, had simply stopped walking and stood there and looked at them with the expression of a man who had been running a very long calculation and had arrived, at last, at its terminal figure. He put his briefcase down. He put his hands up. He said nothing. Adrian received this information sitting on Mara's back porch in the late afternoon. He listened to Marcus's voice, and he looked at the desert going from gold to orange in the declining light, and he felt the specific particular ending of a 9-year tension, not victory. Nothing as clean as that. But the cessation of a sustained pressure that had lived in his body, so long he had stopped noticing it. "Elaine," he said, "picked up at her apartment at 2 o'clock. She's cooperating." A pause. "The federal prosecutor is calling your arrangement fully intact. Everything you agreed this morning holds." "Thank you, Marcus," he said. A silence was on the line. The kind of silence between 2 men who have spent 11 years in close proximity and are approaching the end of what that proximity has been. "What do you need from me?" Marcus said. "Nothing more tonight. Go home. Talk to your lawyer tomorrow morning, first thing. Be honest with him, I know, Marcus." He stopped. He looked at the desert. "I'm sorry. For the position I put you in. For 11 years of it." Another silence, longer. "I made my choices," Marcus said. "Same as you." "Yes," Adrian said. "But I was the one who built the thing we were both choosing." Marcus didn't answer that directly. He said, "I'll call you tomorrow," and hung up. Adrian sat on the porch until the sun finished setting. Mara came out at some point and sat in the other chair and did not speak, and he did not speak. And they sat in the last of the desert light together. Two people who had arrived at an unexpected familiarity through the compressed intimacy of a crisis, and the quiet between them was the comfortable kind. "It's over," Mara said, when the sky had gone fully dark. "The immediate part," he said. "The rest takes years." She nodded. "Prison, yes. How long?" "The prosecutors think 7 to 10, with the cooperation and the circumstances. Harmon thinks closer to 6 if the Voss prosecution goes the way it should." He looked at the sky. "Still significant." "Yes," Mara said. She was quiet for a moment. "You going to use it?" "The time? People go in and they wait for it to be over," she said. "Or they use it. Those are different things." He looked at her. In the dark, her profile was sharp and settled the face of a woman who had been thinking about hard things for a long time and had reached some kind of accommodation with them. "I intend to use it," he said. "Good," she said. "Because Lena's going to know who you are eventually. Kids find out. And what she finds out is going to be colored by who you are when she meets you properly. Not who you were before," he nodded. The weight of that, the specific long weight of it, years compressed into a sentence, settled in him somewhere that didn't have a name. "Mara," he said, "why did you let me in the house the first night?" She considered this. She looked at the dark desert. "Because you knocked once," she said. "The first time you came, you knocked 3 times. Confident. Expected to be let in." She paused. "The second time you knocked once and waited. That's a different man. Doesn't mean he's a good man yet. But it's a different one." She stood up from her chair with the unhurried deliberateness of someone whose joints required a moment. "Come inside. It's getting cold." He came inside. Vivian was in the living room with Lena, who was awake in the alert, early evening way of babies, who have slept through the afternoon and have opinions about the evening. She was holding her against her shoulder, and Lena was looking at the room with the wide, unfocused attention of someone encountering the world fresh, which was all she had ever done, and which was, Adrian thought, the most radical possible state to be in. Vivian looked at Adrian when he came in. "It's done," she said. "Voss is in custody," he said. "The arrangement holds. Federal protective coverage continues through the Voss prosecution, which Harmon estimates at 12 to 18 months. She nodded. She adjusted Lena against her shoulder. "When do you go back to Chicago?" "Tomorrow," he said. "I need to be available for the formal proceedings. The next few weeks are going to be structured. A lot of rooms with lawyers. And then sentencing." He looked at her. "Harmon thinks early spring, if the process moves at normal pace." She looked at him. Lena made a sound not distress, just commentary, the ongoing monologue of a baby taking inventory of her surroundings. Vivian shifted her automatically. The practiced ease of 6 months of this, and the gesture was so ordinary, and so entirely outside anything Adrian had been present, for that it made the 6 months feel like a physical distance rather than a temporal one. "I want to ask you something," Adrian said. "Ask." When it's done. When the sentence is finished." He stopped. He started again with more care. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not going to ask you to wait or to hold anything open. I understand what I cost you, and I understand that you built this." He gestured slightly at the room, at the house, assembled within it. "Without me. And I'm not going to pretend that what I'm about to serve doesn't deserve to be served." He looked at Lena. "But I want to know Lena, not as an entitlement, not because of what the law would give me if I pushed it. I want to know her because she's real and she's in the world, and I held her for 4 minutes, and I understood something that I should have understood a long time ago and didn't." He looked back at Vivian. "I'm asking if that's possible, on your terms, on hers, eventually." "Not mine." The room was quiet. Mara had gone to the kitchen, and the sound of dishes and water filled the distance. Vivian looked at him for a long time. He held it without trying to fill it with anything further. "I don't know," she said. "That's the honest answer. I don't know who you're going to be in 6 years or 7 years or whatever it is. I don't know if accountability in a federal prison looks the same as it looks in this house right now, under these specific conditions, when you've just lost everything, and the alternative to sincerity is nothing." She paused. "That sounds harder than I mean it." "It doesn't," he said. "It sounds accurate." She looked at him. Something shifted in her face, not softening, not forgiveness, but the specific movement of a person who is seeing something clearly and choosing to name it honestly rather than protect themselves from it. I know what I saw in this house in the last 2 days, she said. I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it, but I've been wrong about you before in the other direction. Trusted what I saw and missed what was underneath. She looked at Lena. So I need time, and I need you to not have expectations about what the time produces. Can you do that? Yes, he said. Actually, she said. Not as a negotiating position. Actually, he said. She looked at him one more time. Then she looked down at Lena. Lena, indifferent to all of it, and yet somehow the axis around which every word in the room was turning, had her fist in her mouth, and her eyes fixed on the overhead light with the intense concentration of a person working a serious problem. She has your forehead, Vivian said, quiet, almost to herself. He looked at Lena's forehead. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't ruin it. He left Mara's house at 8 in the morning. He put his jacket in the rental car and stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house, the terracotta tile, the cracked windshield Subaru, the saguaro, in the pale morning light, taller than everything around it and entirely itself. Mara was on the porch. She had a coffee, and she raised it slightly, in a gesture that was not quite a wave, just an acknowledgement. He raised his hand back. Vivian came to the door but not onto the porch. She stood in the doorway with Lena against her shoulder, and she looked at him across the yard. He looked back at her. He had spent 23 years in rooms where he held all the information and all the leverage, and he was standing in a gravel driveway with nothing, no leverage, no empire, no structure of controlled power between himself and whatever was true, and it was, he was surprised to discover, not as terrible as he had believed it would be. It was in fact the clearest he had felt in a very long time. The clarity of a man who has stopped performing and is simply standing in a driveway, looking at his daughter and her mother in the morning light, knowing exactly what he is, knowing exactly what he has lost, knowing exactly what, if he does the years of work honestly and without expectation, he might one day be allowed to earn back, in some form he cannot yet see clearly. He got in the car. He drove down the gravel driveway. He did not look in the rearview mirror, because looking back at this moment was not the thing that would serve him. He would carry it without looking at it, carry it through whatever the next years required, through the rooms with the lawyers, and the rooms with the judge, and the rooms with the gray walls, and the long unstructured hours that Mara had told him he could use or he could waste. He intended to use them. He did not know yet what using them would look like exactly. He knew it would include accountability, which was a word he had handled abstractly for his entire adult life, and which now had specific weight. It would include the counseling that Harmon had already mentioned as part of the cooperative sentencing framework, which he had initially noted as a procedural element and which he now thought about differently. It would include letters. Probably he did not know who would read them, and he was not writing them for an audience. But he thought about the letters. To Vivian, who might not open them and had every right not to. To Lena, who could not read them yet, and who he would write anyway because the writing was the work, and the work was not contingent on the reception. It would include sitting with what he had done without finding ways to manage the sitting. He drove north through the desert toward the city, and the flight back to Chicago, and the beginning of the end of the life he had built. And the desert went on in every direction, unhurried and enormous and entirely indifferent to what any one person was carrying through it. Somewhere behind him, 6 miles south on a 2-lane road, Mara Cross finished her coffee on the porch and went inside. Vivian Cross laid her daughter on the blanket in the living room and sat cross-legged on the floor next to her and watched Lena work on the serious business of learning to hold her own head up, which she was getting better at every day. The federal agent outside did one slow circuit of the yard and came back to his position at the corner of the fence. The desert light moved across the floor of the house in its slow, reliable way. Lena pushed up onto her arms, held it for 3 seconds, looked at the room around her with the wide-open attention of someone who has no framework yet for what is difficult and what is not, who is simply here, simply trying, simply alive in the full unguarded way that only the very young can manage. Then she put her face back down in the blanket. Vivian laughed. Just once, soft, the involuntary laugh of a woman watching something small and determined refuse to give up on the first try. She put her hand on Lena's back, felt the small warmth of her, the breathing. Outside, the desert held its ground, the way it always had, the way it would long after every decision made in its shadow had worked itself out to its natural end. The saguaro in the front yard stood in the morning light, its shadow moving slowly west, patient and old and entirely without opinion about any of it. The story did not end with forgiveness. It ended with a woman and a child in a house in the desert, and a man driving north with everything still ahead of him, and the slow accumulation of days that would determine whether all of it had meant anything at all. That was enough. That was in fact the whole of it. The sentencing happened on a Thursday in early April, 8 months after the gravel driveway and the morning light and the drive north through the desert. Adrian Indel stood in a federal courtroom in Chicago, in a gray suit, not the kind of suit he used to wear, the custom Italian wool that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but a plain gray suit that Harmon had suggested and that Adrian had not argued about, because arguing about suits was the behavior of a man who had not yet understood what room he was actually in. He stood and he listened to the judge read the terms, and he did not look at the gallery behind him, which contained a number of journalists and a smaller number of people who had worked for him, and an even smaller number who had simply wanted to see it happen. 6 years. With the cooperation credit and the Voss prosecution value which had delivered, as Harmon predicted, the most comprehensive organized crime financial case the Northern District had prosecuted in a decade, the judge had landed at the lower end of the framework. 6 years federal facility, with eligibility for early review at the 4-year mark contingent on continued cooperation and documented rehabilitation progress. Adrian said yes, Your Honor, in the appropriate places and signed the appropriate documents, and was taken from the courtroom with his hands in front of him, and he did not perform anything for the cameras outside, and he did not make a statement, and he did not look for anyone's face in the crowd. He had written Vivian a letter the night before. He had written 6 drafts over the course of 3 hours, and burned 5 of them not literally, but deleted them from the legal pad with such thoroughness that the indentations of the words were gone, and the final version was 2 paragraphs. He had not asked for anything in it. He had described what the morning in Tucson had meant to him, and what he intended to do with the years ahead, and he had said that he understood she owed him nothing, not a reply, not an acknowledgement, not the maintenance of any connection whatsoever, and that understanding, that was not a performance of humility, but the actual condition of things as he saw them clearly. He mailed it the morning of the sentencing. He did not know if she would open it. She did. She read it twice, sitting at the kitchen table in Mara's house, her house now, technically, since Marfa had done the quiet legal transfer 3 months ago, with the characteristic efficiency of a woman who organized her affairs, while she was still in full possession of them. Vivian read it and put it face down on the table and sat with it for a while. Lena was in the next room in her playpen, making the sustained commentary of a 9-month-old who had discovered that volume was a variable she could control. Vivian picked the letter up and read it a 3rd time. Then she put it in the drawer of her bedside table, the same drawer where she kept Lena's hospital bracelet and her grandmother's watch and the other small things that were true and permanent and hers. She did not write back, not then. The first year inside, Adrian did what Mara had told him to do. He used the time. The federal facility was not what the movies suggested, and not what he had imagined, and was, in its own particular way, exactly as hard as it needed to be, not because of the physical conditions, which were Spartan but tolerable, but because of the removal of control. Adrian Vale had lived for 23 years in the complete management of his own circumstances. He had controlled what he wore and what he ate, and when he slept, and who he spoke to, and what information he possessed, and what information others did not. He had controlled everything that could be controlled, and had used that control as the architecture of his identity. In the federal facility, he controlled almost nothing. He sat with this. He did not in the first months sit with it gracefully. He was irritable and compressed, and he slept badly, and he read too fast and retained nothing. The counselor assigned to his rehabilitation program, a man named Doyle, who was 58 and unhurried, and had heard every version of every story a person in a federal facility could tell, watched him for 6 weeks before saying anything particularly direct. "You're still running the problem," Doyle said. On a Wednesday afternoon in a small room, with 2 chairs and a window that looked out at a concrete recreation area. "Which problem?" Adrian said. "All of them. You sit here and you answer my questions, and the whole time the part of your mind that built a 9-figure criminal enterprise is running parallel, looking for the angle, calculating what I want to hear, and whether giving it to me serves you." Adrian looked at him. He did not deny it. It's going to be exhausting, Doyle said, to run that for 6 years. And useless. There's no angle here. There's just time and what you do with it. I know that, Adrian said. Knowing it and stopping are different, Doyle said. You'll get there. Most people do, eventually. The ones who don't are the ones who can't tolerate the idea that there are situations you can't outthink. He looked at Adrian with the flat professional curiosity of someone who had spent decades observing people under sustained pressure. I don't think you're one of those. But you're not there yet. He was not there yet. He got there slowly, the way everything real happens, not in a moment of clarity, but in the accumulation of days that looked the same on the outside and were incrementally different on the inside. He started sleeping better in the 4th month. He started retaining the books he read in the 6th. He started somewhere in the 8th month to sit in Doyle's office without running the parallel calculation, which felt, the first time he noticed it had stopped, like taking off a piece of equipment he had been wearing. So long he'd forgotten it had weight. He wrote to Lena every month. He had told himself he would do this, and he did it, even knowing she could not read and could not know. Because the writing was not for her reception, not yet, but for the discipline of articulating something true without an audience. He wrote about what he was learning. Not abstractly, he did not write about redemption or growth in the vocabulary of someone performing change for an observer. He wrote specific things. He wrote about the conversation with Doyle, where he'd understood that outthinking a situation was not the same as being present in it. He wrote about the book on financial ethics he'd read in the 3rd month that had made him angry for reasons he'd had to spend a week examining before he understood them. He wrote about the other men in the facility, not their crimes, not their histories, but the texture of existing alongside people he would never have occupied the same space with before, and what that was like, and what it was making him understand about the size of the world he had previously chosen to inhabit. He sealed each letter and addressed it to Vivian's house, and did not expect them to be read to Lena. He expected, if he was honest, that they were sitting in a box somewhere, or possibly in the trash. He wrote them anyway. Vivian was not reading them to Lena. Lena was a baby, then a toddler. She could not be read letters about financial ethics and self-examination. But Vivian was reading them. Everyone. She read them the way she read things she was not sure about carefully, looking for the seams, the places where the language went smooth and constructed, the places where it was reaching for effect rather than accuracy. She found fewer seams than she expected. The letters were not beautiful. They were not eloquent. They were the letters of a man who had been precise and controlled in language for his entire adult life, and was now deliberately trying to be less controlled, which produced something ungainly and effortful, and more honest than anything he had said to her in 4 years of marriage. She kept them in the drawer with the other permanent things. Mara knew she was keeping them. Mara did not comment, which was its own form of comment, and Vivian understood it as such. Lena turned 2 in March of the 2nd year. She was walking confidently by then, with the particular wide-legged authority of a toddler who has recently discovered locomotion and is not yet interested in refinement. She had opinions about socks. She had opinions about which cup was the correct cup. She had opinions about the saguaro in the front yard, which she called the big stick, and which she greeted by name every morning when Mara brought her outside to see it. She had her father's forehead and her mother's eyes, and Mara's stubbornness, which was the most powerful inheritance of the 3. Vivian had built her life, the way she'd said, she would on her own terms, without waiting for anything to be resolved before she began. She had expanded the remote grant work into a full-time consulting practice, working with conservation and arts foundations across the Southwest. She was good at it, better than she'd been in Chicago, possibly because it was genuinely hers now, no name attached, no structure borrowed from someone else's empire. She had hired a part-time assistant. She had repainted the back bedroom. She had learned, from Mara, how to identify the native plants that bordered the property, their names and their uses and their particular stubbornness and drought, which was considerable. She had dated once briefly a landscape architect she'd met through a foundation client. It had not gone far, and she had not been destroyed by it ending. She had felt, in the aftermath, something she had not expected, not sadness, but a kind of clarity, the clear-sighted understanding of a woman who knows her own timing and is not going to apologize for it. She called Caulfield in the spring of the 2nd year and told her to finalize the divorce. It had been in procedural suspension through the sentencing, and the first year Harmon and Caulfield had arranged a pause while the legal landscape settled. Now the landscape had settled. The terms were straightforward. Vivian wanted nothing from his assets, which were largely frozen or seized. She wanted the legal severance. She wanted her name back. She signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon at Caulfield's office and drove home with the windows down and the desert air coming in, and felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was the uncomplicated sensation of being exactly where she had chosen to be, which was the only sensation that had ever felt like freedom to her. She told Mara when she got home. Mara was on the back porch. She was watching a hawk work, a thermal above the ridge, the way she watched everything patiently, without interfering with it. Done, Mara said. Done, Vivian said. Mara nodded. She looked at the hawk. You feel what you expected to feel? Vivian thought about it. I feel clear, she said. Like a room with the furniture rearranged. You can move through it now without knowing where everything is. Mara seemed to consider this. That's a good kind of clear, she said. At the 4-year mark, Adrian's early review came through. The result was conditional release at the 4-year. 3-month point, meaning he would be out in the early summer of the 5th year, on supervised release for the remaining period, with regular reporting requirements and geographic restrictions. Doyle told him the morning the review was approved. Adrian sat in the small room with the 2 chairs and received the information without visible reaction. Most men in your position are relieved, Doyle said. Visibly. I am relieved, Adrian said. But he looked at the window. The concrete recreation area, the sky above it, the ordinary blue of a day that did not know it was any different from the days before it. I don't know what I'm going back to, he said. In a way I didn't have before. I had a structure, an organization, a position in a geography. He paused. A supervised release agreement and an address to report to. And a daughter, Doyle said, yes. He looked at his hands. Maybe. You've written her 48 letters, Doyle said. I've watched you write them for 4 years. That's not the behavior of a man who thinks maybe. The letters went to her mother, Adrian said. The access went to her mother. Everything goes to her mother's judgment, as it should, and her mother has not indicated. Has she indicated the opposite? He was quiet. She kept the letters, Doyle said simply. Adrian looked at him. You don't know that. No, Doyle said. But you wrote 48 of them, and she never told you to stop. That's not nothing. He wrote one more letter before his release. The longest one and the most plainly written, and the last one addressed to Vivian. He said he was getting out in 6 weeks. He said he was not going to come to Tucson uninvited. He said that if she was willing to have a conversation not about them, not about anything that required her to feel anything she didn't feel, but about Lena, about how he could be present in a way that served Lena and not his own need to be present, then he would like to have that conversation on whatever terms she set and at whatever pace she set them. He said that if she did not respond, he would understand that the answer was no, and he would not ask again. He mailed it on a Monday. She called him on a Friday. Not a letter back, a phone call, which was different, which was the kind of response that skipped a step, that chose directness over the managed distance of correspondence. He was in a common area. He stepped into the hall to take it. Hi, she said. The sound of her voice after 4 years was something he had not prepared for. He stood in the hall and held the phone and managed his face, which required a moment. Hi, he said. I read your letter, she said. I know you might not have... I read all of them, she said. He was quiet. Lena calls the saguaro the big stick, Vivian said. She says good morning to it every day. She has opinions about socks. She told Mara last week that soup is not a food, it's a drink, and they had a serious disagreement about it that lasted 20 minutes. A pause. She's 4. She's sharp, and she's stubborn, and she's funny in a way I didn't expect her to be yet. She makes Mara laugh every day. Another pause. I thought you should know those things. He stood in the hall and felt the 48 letters and the 4 years and the small room with 2 chairs and all of it, compress into the specific simple weight of a woman describing a child to her father, because she had decided, in her own time and on her own terms, that he should know. Thank you, he said. I'm not promising anything, Vivian said. I need you to hear that. I hear it. But Mara says you knocked once the second time. She says that matters. A pause that was smaller than the others. I'm not Mara, But I read 48 letters, and I know what they cost you to write the way you wrote them. So she stopped. So there's a conversation to have. Eventually. On my terms. Yes, he said. Not immediately, she said. You're going to need a few months to figure out who you are outside of a facility. That's not a small thing. No, he said, it's not. And Lena doesn't know anything yet. She's 4. She knows she has a father who isn't there. Kids her age are concrete thinkers. The abstraction comes later. I know, he said. I'll follow your lead on when and how. A silence. Not uncomfortable, the silence of 2 people who have said the thing that needed saying and are now simply present with it. Are you okay? She said, in there. Better than I was, he said. That's honest. I'm trying to be, he said. I know, she said. That's why I called. She hung up. He stood in the hall for a moment. Then he went back to the common area and sat down and picked up the book he'd been reading and did not read it, just held it, feeling the specific weight of a conversation that had cost him nothing in negotiation or performance and had given him more than any deal he had closed in 23 years. He got out on a Tuesday in June. A car service, not the black SUV of his former life. Just a gray sedan from a local company picked him up and drove him to a furnished apartment in Evanston that Harmon had arranged. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that faced north, a view of a parking structure, and beyond it, a slice of Lake Michigan that was visible only from a specific angle. He stood at the window and looked at the lake and felt the open air of an ordinary day traffic. Someone's radio from the parking structure, a dog barking somewhere with the particular attention of a man relearning what ordinary felt like. He called his parole officer and reported his address. He opened the refrigerator that Harmon's assistant had stocked and took out a glass of water and drank it standing at the counter. He sat on the couch and looked at the room. He had no organization. He had no structure. He had no Elaine Marsh, who had taken a plea deal and was serving her own shorter sentence in a federal facility in Ohio. He had no Marcus, who had also cooperated and received a suspended sentence with 5 years of probation, and who had, as far as Adrian knew, moved to Portland and taken a job in corporate security consulting. He had no Silas Voss, who was in the 3rd year of a 14-year sentence and who had not, at any point in the process, acknowledged Adrian's existence. He had a supervised release agreement, a furnished apartment in Evanston, and a phone with Vivian's number in it. He sat on the couch for a while. Then he picked up a notepad he had brought from the facility, a plain yellow legal pad, the same kind he had written the letters on, and he wrote a list. Not a strategy, not a plan for reconstituting anything. Just the things that were real and present, and his to work with, the apartment, the reporting requirement, the need to find work that was legal, and that used whatever was actually useful about his knowledge without leveraging what was not. The conversation with Vivian, the photograph on a refrigerator he had seen 4 years ago, the 4 minutes holding Lena in a chair by a window. He sat with the list. Then he put the notepad down, and he looked at the slice of lake visible from the specific angle of the north-facing window. And he breathed, and he did not run any parallel calculations, and the day moved forward at its own pace, and he let it. 3 months later, on a Saturday in September, Vivian drove from Tucson to a diner in Flagstaff Halfway, which was her term and which he had agreed to without discussion, because halfway was fair and because he was done having opinions about geography when it came to her. He was there first. He had driven up from Phoenix, where he had taken a position as a financial compliance consultant with a small firm whose principal had known him before, and was, to Adrian's continued surprise, interested in the specific knowledge of how criminal financial structures operated and how to identify them. It was legitimate work. It was not glamorous. He was not running anything. He showed up and he did the work, and he drove back to the apartment, and he reported to his parole officer, and he lived inside the contours of a life that was about 1/10 the size of the one he had vacated, and he had slowly come to understand more actual. He sat in a booth at the diner and drank coffee and watched the door. She came in at 12:03. She was wearing the same kind of clothes as when he had seen her in Tucson jeans, a plain shirt, hair back. She was carrying a canvas bag, and she looked, crossing the diner toward him, like a woman who had made a decision and was inside it, and was not performing anything about being inside it. She sat across from him. She looked at him, the way she always had, with the clear assessment of someone who was not going to tell you what she saw until she'd finished seeing it. "You look like yourself," she said. "I'm figuring out what that means," he said. I know. She picked up the menu. Lena told Mara this morning that she wants to meet the man who writes the letters, she said. Looking at the menu, matter of fact. She doesn't know what the letters say. She just knows they exist and that I read them. Kids notice things. He was very still. She's 4, Vivian said. She wants to know things at the level of a 4-year-old. She wants to know if you're tall and if you like dogs, because she's currently extremely interested in whether everyone she meets likes dogs. She put the menu down. She doesn't need a story yet. She just needs a person. Yes, he said so. She met his eyes. We'll have lunch. And then we'll drive back in our separate cars. And in a few weeks, if this, she paused, choosing the word carefully. If this conversation is what it seems like it is, then maybe I drive down with her, and you meet her in a park somewhere neutral, and you answer her questions about dogs. I like dogs, he said. He didn't know why he said it. It was simply true. Something moved in Vivian's face that was unmistakably, almost a smile. Good, she said, that'll help. The waitress came. They ordered. The diner around them was ordinary and loud in the Saturday noon way, full of families and road trippers, and a group of elderly cyclists in bright jerseys at the long table by the window. The light came in at an angle. The coffee was adequate. The conversation that followed was not about the past 4 years, not about the empire or the letters or the folder on a marble table, but about the present, his work, her practice, Mara's latest opinions on the soup is a drink controversy, the native plants along the property border and their names. It was the most ordinary conversation he had had in as long as he could remember. He understood somewhere during it that ordinary was what he had been building toward without knowing it, not as a consolation prize for having lost everything larger, but as the thing that had been worth having all along, that he had been too occupied with scale to see. He drove back to Phoenix in the late afternoon. The desert south of Flagstaff was doing the thing it did in September, the light going amber and long, the colors of the rock faces shifting through the hour, the vastness of it all moving around, the small fact of a man in a car on a highway, unhurried and immense. He drove. He did not run any calculations. He let the desert be the desert, and he let the road be the road, and he let the next thing come when it came. Somewhere south of him, 6 weeks away in calendar time and immeasurable in every other sense, a 4-year-old with her father's forehead was asking Mara whether the big stick in the yard liked dogs. Mara, who never lied to the child about anything, said she honestly didn't know, but she thought they'd find out soon enough.